Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval bakery and I promise you, this isn't the cozy, flour-dusted fantasy you're imagining. Picture this. It's 2 a.m. on a freezing January morning in 1347, and you're stumbling through pitch-black streets toward a stone building that's already radiating heat like a dragon's mouth. Your hands are cracked and bleeding from yesterday's work. Your lungs feel like someone stuffed them with sawdust. And you know that somewhere in the next 16 hours, you're probably going to get burned, possibly robbed by your own guild master, and maybe just maybe arrested for selling a loaf that's 2 ounces too light. Welcome to your new job. You probably won't make it to sunset. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'm curious, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in Tokyo at lunch? London at midnight? Let me know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're jolting awake in complete darkness, and for a disorienting second, you forget where you are. Then the cold hits you, that bone-deep medieval cold that no amount of blankets can fix because, let's be honest, you've got maybe one scratchy wool covering and it's doing absolutely nothing. Your straw mattress crinkles beneath you as you shift, and you can hear something scurrying in the corner. Rat? Probably. You've stopped caring. The church bells haven't even rung for matins yet, but your body clock beaten into submission by months of this routine knows it's time. 2 in the morning, the baker's hour, while everyone else in your medieval town is blissfully unconscious. You're about to start a workday that would make modern labor laws weep. You're fumbling in the dark for your clothes, which are still damp from yesterday's sweat. There's no such thing as a fresh start in a medieval bakery. You wear the same tunic for weeks, and it's encrusted with enough flour to bake itself. The fabric is stiff against your skin as you pull it over your head, and you catch that signature smell, old sweat, with smoke, and that peculiar yeasty funk that never quite washes out. Not that you wash much anyway. Water's for drinking and dough, not for bathing. Your feet hit the frozen floor and you're instantly awake. Winter mornings in medieval Europe don't mess around. You're shoving your feet into wooden clogs, those incredibly uncomfortable things that every peasant and trades person wears, and already your toes are protesting. These aren't the cute decorative clogs you see in souvenir shops. These are chunks of carved wood with a bit of leather, designed for function, not comfort, and they make this horrible clacking sound on cobblestones that probably wakes half the neighborhood every morning. Sorry, neighbors. You're stepping outside into darkness so complete it feels like a physical thing. No streetlights, obviously. No helpful neon signs pointing you toward the bakery. Just blackness and the occasional rush of movement that might be a cat, might be another rat, might be something you really don't want to investigate. The street smells like a mixture of chamber pots, animal waste, and that general medieval funk that historians politely call organic urban decay. You're breathing through your mouth. The bakery is only 3 buildings down, but you're navigating by feel and memory. Your hand trails along the rough stone walls, and you're counting doorways. 1, 2. There, the third one is radiating heat even through the wooden door. You made it. Congratulations. You've successfully walked 30 feet in the dark without falling into a ditch or stepping in something unspeakable. You're pushing open the heavy door, and the blast of heat is almost violent. After the freezing street, the bakery interior feels like walking into hell's waiting room, and actually, that's not far off. The main oven is already glowing, a massive stone structure that takes up nearly half the room, and your master baker is already there, silhouetted against the fire like some flour-covered demon. He doesn't greet you. He just grunts and gestures toward the wood pile. Here's your first task of the day, and it's the one that might actually kill you: stoking the oven. You're grabbing logs from the pile oak, mostly, because it burns hot and long and you're feeding them into an opening that's radiating heat so intense you can't get closer than 2 feet without your face feeling like it's melting. The trick is to throw the wood just right so it lands in the fire without you having to reach in. Get it wrong, and you're plunging your arm into temperatures that hover around 500 to 700 degrees Fahrenheit. You're sweating already, and you've been here maybe 5 minutes. The temperature inside a working medieval bakery sits comfortably around 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, even in winter and summer. It's a legitimate health hazard. You're essentially working in a sauna while doing hard manual labor for 16 hours straight. Modern occupational safety experts would shut this place down in seconds. But here you are, in 1347, and there's bread to make. The oven is a beast that demands constant attention. It's not like you can just turn a dial and walk away. This is a wood-fired stone oven, probably built by the same family that's owned this bakery for 3 generations. And it has a personality. A mean one. You're learning its moods the hard way. Too much wood and the temperature spikes, burning the bottom of the loaves. Too little and the bread comes out pale and doughy, which will get you fined by the guild or worse, pelted with your own failed products by angry customers. Historians still argue whether medieval bakers actually developed a kind of thermal sensitivity, a way of reading the oven's temperature just by looking at the color of the flames or holding their hand near the opening. Some say it's myth. Others point to generations of bakers who never used thermometers because, well, thermometers wouldn't be invented for another few centuries. You're going to have to develop this sixth sense or burn a lot of bread trying. Your master is barking something at you, and you're snapping to attention. He's pointing at the dough troughs, long wooden boxes that look like they haven't been properly cleaned since the Crusades. This is where yesterday's dough has been slowly fermenting overnight, and your job now is to start the actual mixing for today's batch. You're rolling up your sleeves, which is pointless because they're about to be covered in dough anyway, and plunging your hands into the massive pile of flour. The flour itself is an adventure in questionable quality. If you're lucky, and luck is not really a medieval concept, you've got relatively clean wheat flour. But more likely, you're working with a mixture that includes barley, right, and possibly some other grains that got thrown in because they were cheap. There are little black specks in it. Those might be bran. They might be mouse droppings. You've learned not to ask. You're adding water from the bucket, and you're measuring by feel because precise measurements are for fancy monastery bakers. Not you. Too much water and the dough is soup. Too little and it's a rock. You're kneading now, really putting your back into it. And this is where the real work begins. Medieval bread dough is dense. Heavy stuff, none of this light and airy artisanal nonsense. You're making bread designed to fill peasant bellies and last for days without going stale, which means you're essentially wrestling with a mass that has the consistency of clay. Your arms are burning. Your back is already starting to protest, and the shift has barely started. You're leaning your whole body weight into the kneading, pushing the dough away from you, folding it back, turning it, repeating, over and over. The rhythm becomes meditative if you let it, but mostly it's just exhausting. Here's a fun quirk that medieval baking manuals actually mention. Some bakers would knead dough with their feet to save their arms. You're not doing that, though, because your master would probably beat you with a paddle. Feet are for walking through medieval filth, not for making bread. At least, not officially. The bakery is filling with other apprentices. Now 3 others stumble in, looking exactly as exhausted as you feel. There's no cheerful good morning banter. Everyone just assumes their position in this well-worn dance of bread production. One guy heads to the proving area where yesterday's loaves are waiting. Another starts hauling more flour sacks from the storage room. The third, poor soul, gets assigned to oven duty full-time, which means he'll spend the entire day managing the fire and will go home looking like a coal miner. You're shaping loaves now, and this is where the guild rules get really weird. Every loaf has to be a specific weight, usually around 2 pounds for a standard loaf, and it has to be that weight after baking. But bread loses moisture as it bakes. which means you need to make it heavier before it goes in. How much heavier? Well, that depends on the humidity, the flour moisture content, the oven temperature, and approximately 17 other variables that you're supposed to just know through experience. Get it wrong consistently, and the guild inspector will have words with you. Painful words. The first batch of loaves is going into the oven, and you're using a long wooden peel, basically a giant pedlito, slide them onto the stone floor. The opening is roaring with heat, and you're working as fast as you can because every second you stand there, you're losing skin moisture at an alarming rate. Your face feels tight and hot. Your eyes are watering from the smoke, and you're pretty sure you just singed your eyebrows off. Again, mainstream history loves to romanticize medieval craftsmanship, talking about skilled artisans and their dedication to their craft. And sure, there's skill here, incredible skill, actually. But let's be real, you're working in conditions that would be illegal in every developed country today, for wages that barely keep you fed, under the constant threat of punishment from about 6 different authorities. The guild, the church, the local lord, angry customers, your master baker, and let's not forget the ever-present threat of your own oven deciding to collapse and crush you. Speaking of which, here's a cheerful thought. Oven collapses are a genuine occupational hazard. These massive stone structures are held together with mortar that deteriorates over time, and they're subjected to extreme temperature fluctuations every single day. Records from medieval England actually document several incidents of ovens just giving up and crushing whoever was standing nearby. You're trying not to think about this as you work, but every time you hear a crack or groan from the stonework, your heart does a little skip. The rhythm of the bakery is building now. Loaves in, loaves out. Mix, knead, shape, bake, repeat. The sky outside is maybe starting to show the barest hint of pre-dawn gray, but you've been working for over 2 hours already. Your hands are covered in flour paste. Your back is screaming, and you're pretty sure you've inhaled enough flour dust to bake a loaf in your lungs. Here's something the history books don't emphasize enough. Medieval bakers were basically living in a constant cloud of particulate matter. Every time you move a flour sack, every time you knead dough, every time someone walks across the flour-covered floor, you're kicking up a cloud of fine particles that would make an OSHA inspector faint. You're breathing this stuff for 16 hours a day, and you're going to keep breathing it until your lungs decide they've had enough, which for many bakers happens around age 40. If they even make it that long. But right now, at 4:30 a.m., you're not thinking about long-term health consequences. You're thinking about the fact that your stomach is growling, and you won't get to eat until the master decides it's time, which could be hours from now. You're thinking about how the heat is making you dizzy. You're thinking about how you've got at least 12 more hours of this ahead of you. The first batch of bread is coming out, and you're using the peel to retrieve the loaves. They're golden brown, crusty, and they smell absolutely incredible, that primal, yeasty, warm smell that has been making humans salivate for thousands of years. For a second, you forget how miserable you are. Then you remember that you can't actually eat any of this. This bread is for paying customers. You get the scraps, the burned bits, the loaves that cracked wrong. If you're lucky, you're stacking the finished loaves in the cooling area, and even through the cloth you're using to handle them, they're almost too hot to touch. You're moving fast because the next batch is ready to go in, and the master is watching you with those perpetually disappointed eyes that every medieval authority figure seems to have perfected. You get the feeling that no matter how well you do this job, it will never be quite good enough. And you know what? You're probably right. The medieval apprenticeship system is basically designed to keep you feeling inadequate for 7 to 10 years until you maybe, possibly, if you're very lucky and don't die first, become a journeyman. But that's a story for later. Right now, you're just trying to survive until dawn. You're 3 hours into your shift now, and the real gamble of medieval baking is about to reveal itself. That massive sack of rye flour in the corner? The one your master just told you to start mixing into the dough? Yeah, that's not just flour. That's a potential death sentence wrapped in burlap. And you won't know if you're poisoning half the town until it's way too late. Welcome to grain roulette, medieval style. You're hauling the sack over to the mixing area, and already something seems off. The flour has this faint pinkish tinge to it, and there are these dark, elongated bits mixed in that look almost like mouse droppings but longer. Your stomach does a little flip because you've heard the stories. Every baker has. But your master is watching, and questioning the grain quality is not really something apprentices get to do. So you're dumping it into the trough anyway and praying to every saint you can remember. Those dark bits? They're called ergot, and they're about to make your life very, very complicated. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye and other grains, especially in wet years when the crops don't dry properly. It looks like little dark growths sticking out of the grain kernels, and when it gets ground into flour, creates this slightly off-color powder that's absolutely loaded with toxic alkaloids. We're talking about natural compounds that are chemical cousins to Lest because yes, ergot contains lysergic acid, the base compound that a Swiss chemist will eventually turn into the most famous hallucinogen in history. But that's about 600 years in your future. Right now, all you know is that bread made with ergot-contaminated flour makes people very, very sick. You're mixing the flour with water, and you're trying to convince yourself that it's fine. Maybe it's just discolored from storage. Maybe those dark bits are just heavily toasted grain. Maybe you're overthinking this. But your hands are working automatically, kneading the dough while your brain is running through worst-case scenarios. Here's what happens when people eat ergot-contaminated bread. First, they get the digestive symptoms: violent stomach cramps, nausea, vomiting, unpleasant, but survivable. But then it gets weird. Their fingers and toes start to tingle, then burn, then go numb. They might start seeing things, vivid hallucinations, demonic visions, the whole medieval nightmare package. In severe cases, their extremities literally start to die. The blood vessels constrict so severely that fingers, toes, even entire hands and feet turn black and gangrenous. People called it St. Anthony's fire, because the burning sensation was so intense, and the only hope for relief was to pray at the shrine of St. Anthony. Historians still argue whether ergot poisoning was responsible for some of the more bizarre episodes in medieval history. The dancing plagues, where entire towns supposedly danced themselves to exhaustion. Possibly ergot. Some of the wilder visions reported by mystics and saints. Maybe divine inspiration. Maybe moldy rye. The Salem witch trials. Centuries later, some researchers think ergot contamination might explain the bewitched girl's symptoms. The science is debated, but the human suffering was definitely real. You're shaping this potentially toxic dough into loaves, and each one feels like a little game of chance. Will this batch be fine? Will it sicken a few people? Will it trigger a full-blown outbreak of St. Anthony's fire that gets traced back to your bakery? Because here's the thing, when people get sick from bread, they don't blame bad grain or fungi or agricultural practices. They blame the baker. And the punishments for selling bad bread are creative. Your master is checking the loaves now, squeezing them to test the texture, and you're watching his face for any sign of concern. But he seems satisfied, which either means the ergot content is low enough to pass visual inspection or more likewise willing to take the risk. Because here's the dirty secret of medieval baking. Sometimes you don't have a choice. The grain supply is what it is. If the harvest was wet, if the storage was poor, if this is all you can afford, then this is what goes into the bread. Throwing out contaminated grain means lost profit. And lost profit means you can't pay your guild fees, and unpaid guild fees mean you're out of business. So you bake it anyway and hope for the best. You're sliding these questionable loaves into the oven, and you're thinking about a story you heard from another apprentice. His previous master had a batch go bad really bad. 3 people died, including a child. The baker was dragged before the guild court, then the town court, then the church court. Each one fined him, and the town court added a bonus punishment. He had to stand in the pillory for 3 days while people pelted him with his own poisonous bread. He lost his bakery, his reputation, everything. Last anyone heard, he was begging on the roads. That could be you, all because of some pinkish flour. The oven's heat is making you lightheaded, or maybe it's the flour dust, or maybe you're just panicking. You're wiping sweat from your forehead with your flour-covered hand, which just means you're now wearing a paste of sweat and potentially ergot-contaminated flour on your face. Great. If you start hallucinating later, at least you'll know why. Here's a quirky little detail that medieval grain merchants definitely didn't advertise. Different grains have different contamination risks. Rye is the worst for ergot because of how the grain structure allows the fungus to take hold. Wheat is generally safer, but also more expensive, which is why poor people ate more rye bread and, consequently, got sick more often. Barley can harbor its own set of fungal problems. Oats are relatively safe but make terrible bread. It's like a choose-your-own-adventure of potential food poisoning, and you're the one serving it up to your neighbors. You're moving on to the wheat flour now, the good stuff, reserved for wealthy customers who can afford bread that probably won't kill them. The contrast is stark. This flour is pale, clean-looking, with none of those ominous dark specks. You're mixing it with what feels like relief, like you're finally making something that won't result in your execution. But even good wheat flour has its issues. You're kneading away, and you feel something hard. A small stone, then another. The grinding process done by hand at the local mill with massive stones inevitably leaves little chips and fragments in the flour. You're supposed to sift it, but sifting takes time, and time is profit lost. So mostly you just accept that your bread has a little extra mineral content. Hopefully, customers don't break a tooth. Hopefully, if they do, they don't blame you. Actually, they definitely will blame you. The medieval food supply chain is basically a series of quality control nightmares, and you're at the end of it, holding the loaf. The farmer grows grain that might be contaminated. The miller grinds it with stones that shed fragments. The grain merchant stores it in conditions that might encourage mold. And then you, the baker, turn it into something people put in their mouths. And somehow you're responsible for every single thing that went wrong before it reached you. You're checking the oven temperature by holding your hand near the opening, that trick you're supposedly developing through experience. The radiant heat is intense, and you're counting 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. You have to pull away. That means it's hot enough. Probably. The bread god's willing. There's this whole art to reading an oven that modern bakers with their digital thermometers will never understand. The color of the flames tells you something. Blue-white means it's scorching hot. Orange-red means it's cooling down. The way the heat hits your face when you open the door. The smell of the baking bread. The sound, yes. Sound off the crust forming. You're learning to orchestrate all these sensory inputs into a judgment call about whether the bread will be perfect, mediocre, or a disaster. And here's where it gets really fun. You're also supposed to predict how the grain quality will affect baking time. That ergot-contaminated rye? It might bake differently than clean rye. Wetter grain needs longer. Older grain is drier and might burn faster. You're essentially running chemical calculations in your head without knowing any chemistry, based on experience you're still acquiring, with stakes that include your livelihood and possibly your life. No pressure. You're pulling out another batch, and the loaves look decent. Golden crust, good rise, no obvious catastrophes. You're stacking them carefully because even at this stage, things can go wrong. Drop a loaf and it might crack, making it unsellable. Stack them wrong and the weight crushes the bottom ones. Leave them in the hot area too long and they keep cooking, drying out and becoming hard as rocks. Your master is inspecting the rye loaves, now the questionable ones, and he's nodding approval. They look fine. They smell fine. And that's the terrifying thing about ergot. It doesn't necessarily change the bread's appearance or taste. Someone could bite into one of these loaves, think it's delicious, and then spend the next week descending into a nightmare of burning extremities and hallucinations. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem is meeting quota. The storage area is getting crowded with finished loaves, and you're starting to see the scale of a medieval bakery's operation. On a good day, a decent-sized bakery might produce 200 to 300 loaves. That's a lot of potential for something to go wrong. It's also a lot of flour, which brings us to another fun aspect of grain roulette, the sheer cost. Grain prices fluctuate wildly in medieval times. A bad harvest year and prices quintuple. A great harvest and they plummet. There's no commodity exchange, no futures market to stabilize things. Just raw supply and demand, complicated by the fact that local lords might decide to requisition grain for their armies, or the church might demand its tithe, or bandits might raid the granaries. And you, the baker, are expected to produce consistent bread at consistent prices regardless of these wild market swings. So when grain is expensive and possibly contaminated, but it's all you can afford, what do? You stretch it. You mix in cheaper grains. You maybe add some ground peas or beans to bulk it up. You definitely don't throw it out just because it has a few dark specks. You're sweeping the floor, now a Sisyphean task in a bakery where flour dust is constantly falling like snow. The broom just pushes clouds of it into the air, where it hangs in the beams of early morning light now filtering through the high windows. You're breathing it in with every breath, and you wonder idly if your lungs are going to turn into dough. Here's a mainstream historical fact that's appropriately grim. Respiratory diseases were the leading cause of death for medieval bakers, even above burns and accidents. Your lungs are not designed to process this much particulate matter. Over years of breathing flour dust, bakers developed what we'd now recognize as occupational asthma or even pneumoconiosis. Basically, your lungs get scarred and stiff from all the inhaled particles. It's called baker's lung in some historical medical texts, and it's exactly as pleasant as it sounds. But you're young, and your lungs feel fine right now, so you're not worried. You're more concerned about the rat you just saw dart behind the flour sacks. Rats are another constant in the grain-to-bread pipeline. They're in the fields, they're in the storage facilities, they're in the mill, and they're definitely in your bakery. Medieval pest control is basically get a cat and hope for the best, which is why every bakery has at least one Mauser prowling around. Yours is a scraggly orange Tom that's currently sitting on a high shelf, watching you work with supreme indifference. He's supposed to be catching rats, but right now he seems more interested in napping. The rats are a problem beyond just being gross. They eat grain, contaminate it with droppings, and spread diseases. But here's the thing, a little rat damage is just considered normal. You work around it. That flour with the suspicious dark specks? Some of those might actually be rodent droppings. You don't think about it too hard. You just sift when you remember to and hope that baking temperatures kill anything problematic. You're mixing another batch, this time a mixture of wheat and barley, and your arms are starting to seriously protest. This may be 6 in the morning now, and you've been kneading dough in various forms for 4 hours. Your shoulders feel like they're on fire, your hands are raw, and you're pretty sure you're developing calluses on top of your calluses. The barley bread is for the poorest customers, the ones who can't afford wheat and won't risk rye. Barley makes dense, heavy bread that's nutritious enough but has all the flavor and texture of compressed sawdust. You're not putting much love into this batch because, honestly, the people buying it won't notice. They're just grateful to have something to fill their stomachs. And here's where medieval social hierarchy plays out in bread form. The grain quality literally reflects your social status. Pure white wheat bread? Your nobility or wealthy merchant class. Wheat rye blend? Solid middle class. Pure rye? Working poor. Barley? You're one step above starving. There's even a bread made from a mixture of grains, peas, and sometimes acorns that's fed to the desperately poor and prisoners. You don't make that here. Your bakery has some standards, but you've seen it. It's gray, dense, and probably tastes like despair. You're shaping the barley loaves with less care than the wheat ones, and your master doesn't even comment. Everyone knows the hierarchy. Everyone accepts it. The idea that all bread should be created equal won't really catch on for another few centuries. The sun is properly up now, and you can hear the town waking up outside. Church bells ringing, cart wheels on cobblestones, someone shouting about fish for sale. And soon, your first customers will arrive, ready to buy the bread you've been making since before they even woke up. You're looking at the day's production lined up on the shelves, and you're doing mental math. How many of these loaves might be contaminated? 1 in 10? 1 in 20? Maybe you got lucky and it's none. Or maybe that whole batch of rye bread is a ticking time bomb, and in a few days, you'll be the most hated person in town. But right now, they look beautiful. Golden crusts, varied shapes and sizes. The smell filling the bakery with that comforting aroma that makes people forget about wars, plagues, and feudal oppression for just a moment. Bread is life in medieval times, literally. It's 70% of most people's caloric intake. It's currency, it's status, it's survival. And you just made several hundred loaves that might be totally fine or might trigger an outbreak of St. Anthony's fire. Welcome to medieval quality control. Guess and pray. Word count: 2,847. You're heading to the water bucket for a drink. Your throat is parched from the dry heat and flour dust when your master calls you over. He's holding up one of the rye loaves, examining it in the morning light streaming through the window. Your heart does that anxiety skip again because you know what he's looking at. The crumb, the interior texture of the bread, has visible dark streaks running through it. Ergot. He looks at you, looks at the bread, then shrugs and puts it with the others destined for sale. It's mild, he says, which is medieval baker code for probably won't kill anyone. Probably. He's making a business calculation right there. The risk of someone getting sick versus the certainty of lost profit if he throws out an entire batch. The math isn't hard. The bread stays. You're nodding like this is totally normal and fine, because in this world, it is. Nobody's running laboratory tests on grain samples. There's no FDA, no food safety standards beyond, don't intentionally poison people and try not to accidentally poison them too much. The line between acceptable risk and negligent homicide is blurry, negotiated in the moment by tired bakers trying to make a living. Here's something that really captures the medieval approach to food safety. There are actually guild regulations about ergot, but they're hilariously vague. Something like grain should be wholesome and not harmful, which is about as useful as telling someone to make good bread. What's wholesome? How harmful is too harmful? Nobody really knows, and the standards seem to shift depending on how hungry people are and how expensive grain is. You're back to the mixing area, starting yet another batch, and you're thinking about the strange economics of contamination. In a famine year, when people are desperate, you could probably sell bread made from ergot-riddled grain and nobody would complain, at least not until they got sick. But in a good year, with plenty of grain around, customers get picky. They'll break open a loaf right there in the shop, examining the crumb for discoloration, and demand their money back if they see anything suspicious. This isn't a good year. Last harvest was mediocre, and grain supplies are tight, which means your master is probably right. People will buy the questionable bread and be grateful for it. They might even prefer it to nothing, which is the alternative for many. You're kneading this new batch more wheat, thankfully, and you're developing a rhythm. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. It's meditative in a way, or it would be if your brain could stop calculating the probability of causing a public health crisis. You're imagining the scenario. Town crier announcing an outbreak. Guild investigators tracking it back to your bakery. The master throwing you under the cart to save himself. It was the apprentice. He'd say, he must have mixed the batches wrong. And technically, you did mix them. Your hands, your responsibility. The sound of the first customer knocking on the front door snaps you out of this pleasant daydream. Your master wipes his hands and heads to the shop area separate room at the front of the building where customers can't see the organized chaos of production. You catch a glimpse of a woman with a basket, coins already in hand, ready to buy her family's daily bread. She has no idea what she might be buying. And that ignorance, in a weird way, is a mercy. You're loading more loaves into the oven, and the morning production rush is really hitting now. Every batch has to be perfect, or perfect enough, or at least sellable. The standards are surprisingly high. For some things a misshapen loaf can be rejected by picky customers, but shockingly low for others. Visible mold? Just scrape it off. Suspiciously dark specks? Character? Slight smell of rot? Adds depth. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, medieval food safety makes ancient Egyptian cosmetics look positively scientific. At least the Egyptians were only putting weird stuff on their skin. You're putting it in people's stomachs. You're finally getting a break, and by break, I mean your master is letting you sit down for approximately 4 minutes to shove some bread in your mouth before the mid-morning rush hits. You're gnawing on a piece of yesterday's barley loaf that's hard enough to use as a weapon, and you're thinking about how you got here, how you ended up in this flour-filled hellscape, bound by contracts that might as well be iron chains. Welcome to the guild system, where your dreams of becoming a master baker go to die slowly over the course of 7 to 10 years. You're washing down the sawdust bread with lukewarm water, and your mind drifts back to 3 years ago when your father, a reasonably successful cobbler, decided that you needed a trade. Not his trade. Mind you, he had 2 other sons for that. You were the expendable third boy, the one who could be shipped off to learn something else. So he paid the entry fee, sum that probably hurt the family finances more than he'd admit, and signed you over to Master William, the baker whose shop you're currently trapped in. The contract is for 7 years. You're 3 years in, which means 4 more years of this, assuming you survive. And survival is not guaranteed, which is something nobody mentioned when your father was negotiating terms. You're brushing crumbs off your flour-encrusted tunic when Master William barks your name. Break time's over. You're hauling yourself, you pevery muscle, protesting and heading back to the mixing area. But before you can get there, the door slams open and 2 men stride in wearing the distinctive badges of the Bakers' Guild. Your stomach drops. Guild inspectors. They're here unannounced, which is always bad news. The older Oni master baker himself from a competing shop has this expression of barely concealed delight at the prospect of finding violations. The younger one is carrying a ledger and looks bored. They're not here to help. They're here to find problems, assess fines, and generally make your master's life miserable. And by extension, your life, because when the master is unhappy, guess who he takes it out on? You're watching your master transform instantly into his greeting guild officials, persona all smiles and deference, and, "How can I help you, gentlemen?" But you can see the tension in his shoulders. Everyone in the bakery has gone absolutely still, like rabbits hoping the fox hasn't noticed them. The lead inspector is already poking around, running his finger along surfaces, examining loaves, squinting at the oven. He picks up one of the rye loaves naturally, one from the batch you were worrying about, and breaks it open. You're holding your breath. He examines the crumb, sees those dark streaks, and his eyebrow goes up. "Ergot?" he asks, his tone suggesting he already knows the answer. Your master launches into an explanation about grain quality this year, supplier problems, how it's only trace amounts, barely visible, certainly not enough to cause harm. The inspector is nodding along with this expression that says he's heard it all before, which he has, because every baker in town is dealing with the same contaminated grain supply. Here's the thing about guild inspectors. They're not actually trying to maintain food safety. Well, not primarily. They're maintaining guild power. Every violation they find is a fine that goes into guild coffers. Every infraction is leverage. Every struggling baker is an opportunity to remind everyone who's really in charge. It's less protecting the public and more organized shakedown with official sanction. The inspector is writing something in his ledger. Your master's jaw is clenched. You're trying to be invisible in the corner, but the younger inspector has noticed you and is walking over. He's looking you up and down like you're livestock at market. "This your apprentice?" he asks your master. "Yes, sir. 3rd year." He looks underfed. This is rich coming from a guild official, but you keep your face neutral. The implication is clear. A master who doesn't properly feed his apprentice isn't properly fulfilling his guild obligations. Never mind that your master feeds you about as well as any apprentice in town, which is to say, barely enough to keep working. The inspector is just looking for angles. Historians still argue whether the medieval guild system was primarily about maintaining quality standards or about creating monopolistic control over trades. The Romantic view says guilds were noble organizations preserving craftsmanship. The cynical view says they were protection rackets with better PR. From where you're standing, covered in flour and watching your master get squeezed for fines, the cynical view seems pretty accurate. The lead inspector is at the oven now, examining the structure. He's tapping the stones, checking mortar, and you're praying nothing is visibly wrong because oven violations are expensive. There's a whole section in the guild regulations about proper oven construction, maintenance, and operation. The stones must be a certain quality. The mortar must be replaced annually. The chimney must draw properly. The floor must be level. It's like building codes, but enforced by people who profit from finding violations. He finds one. Of course he does. "This mortar is degraded," he announces, pointing to a section near the back of the oven. Regulation 47, subsection C. Mortar must be maintained in good repair to prevent collapse and ensure even heating. Your master is arguing that it was just repaired 6 months ago, that it's well within acceptable wear, that it poses no safety risk. The inspector is unmoved. He's writing in his ledger. That's another fine. You're watching this performance and starting to understand the real structure of medieval commerce. The official story is that guilds exist to maintain standards, train apprentices properly, and ensure customer satisfaction. The real story is that guilds exist to control who can practice a trade, extract money from practitioners through fees and fines, and maintain a hierarchy that benefits the established masters at everyone else's expense. Your path to becoming a master baker, assuming you survive your apprenticeship, goes something like this. 7 years as an apprentice, during which you're basically slave labor. Your master provides food, shelter, and training, but mostly he provides backbreaking work for no wages. Then, if you're lucky and he doesn't extend your term for inadequate progress, you become a journeyman. As a journeyman, you finally get paid. Not much, but it's something. You're allowed to work for wages in any bakery that'll hire you. But here's the catch. You can't open your own shop. You can't compete with the masters. You can work for them, making them money, but you can't threaten their market position. This phase lasts another 3 to 5 years, during which you're supposed to be saving money for your masterpiece. The masterpiece is your ticket to becoming a full guild master. You have to create a piece of work in your case, probably an elaborate decorative bread or series of loaves that demonstrates your skill to the guild judges, who are, conveniently, the existing masters, who have a vested interest in limiting competition. See the problem? The judges can reject your masterpiece for any reason or no reason. Insufficient skill, poor technique, not up to guild standards, and each attempt costs you money fees for the examination, materials, lost wages while you're preparing. Some journeymen make 5, 6, 7 attempts before being accepted. Some never make it at all and just stay journeymen forever, enriching masters but never becoming one themselves. And if you do somehow pass, congratulations. Now you owe the guild a massive entry fee to officially become a master. We're talking about a sum that might equal several years of journeyman wages. Most people have to borrow it, going into debt before they even open their shop. The guild loves this because debt means control. Can't pay? They'll generously allow you to work it off, probably by giving them a cut of your profits for years. Oh, and even once you're a master, you're not done paying. Annual guild dues, fees for inspections like the one happening right now, fines for violations both real and imagined, special assessments when the guild decides it needs money for something. It's a system designed to extract maximum value from bakers at every stage of their careers. You're snapping back to the present as the inspectors finish their tour. The lead one is presenting your master with a summary of violations. The ergot-contaminated grain, warning, but no fine this time because everyone's grain is contaminated. The degraded mortar, fine, 3 shillings. Improper storage of flour sacks, fine, 1 shilling. And this one's creative insufficient ventilation leading to unhealthy working conditions for apprentices, fine, 2 shillings. 6 shillings total. That's about 3 days of bakery profit. Just gone. Your master's face is red, but he's nodding and promising to remedy the violations immediately. The inspectors are satisfied. They've done their job, which is less about fixing problems and more about reminding everyone who's in charge. They leave, and your master immediately rounds on you. Not because you did anything wrong, but because he's furious and you're the lowest person on the hierarchy ladder. You're getting a lecture about properly stacking flour sacks. Even though you stack them exactly how you always stack them, you're nodding and apologizing for violations you didn't commit. This is your life now. Here's a quirky little detail about the guild system that really captures its spirit. In some towns, guilds had regulations about what masters could teach apprentices and when. You weren't allowed to learn certain secret techniques until your 5th or 6th year. Why? Because if you learn too quickly, you might finish your apprenticeship early and move on, depriving the master of cheap labor. The system was designed to keep you dependent and productive for as long as possible. You're back at the mixing area, trying to process what just happened, when another apprentice, Thomas, who's been here 5 years, sidles up to you. He's got this knowing look. First inspection? He asks. You nod. Gets worse. He says cheerfully, wait until they come during a church holiday. Triple fines if they catch you working when you're supposed to be at Mass. This is news to you, and not good news. You're mentally calculating how many church holidays there are, at least 60 or 70 throughout the year, and wondering how anyone makes money with all these restrictions. Thomas is continuing his grim education. And don't even think about trying to open a shop without guild approval when you're done. My cousin tried that. Set up a bakery in the next town over. Figured he was far enough away that the guild wouldn't care. They sent enforcers. Smashed his oven. Confiscated his tools. Beat him pretty good. He's a beggar now. You're kneading dough with increased vigor, partly from the work and partly from frustration. The guild enforcers are another lovely aspect of the system. They're basically thugs with official sanction. sent to deal with anyone who tries to practice the trade without guild membership. Unlicensed bakers, people selling bread without authorization, anyone who threatens the guild monopoly, they all get a visit from the enforcement crew. And it's not just other bakers they go after. If a housewife starts selling bread she made at home to her neighbors, that's competition. The guild might send someone to explain for Svala that commercial baking is guild business only. If a monastery starts selling their surplus bread in town, undercutting guild prices, there'll be a strongly worded complaint to the bishop, backed by implied threats. The guild controls everything: who can bake, where they can bake, how much they can charge, what ingredients they can use, even what their shop signs can look like. It's a comprehensive monopoly enforced by legal authority and physical intimidation. You're shaping loaves and thinking about the apprentices who don't make it through the system. Some die. The work is dangerous, the hours brutal, the conditions unhealthy. Some run away, preferring to risk life as vagabonds rather than continue the grind. Some get released early, which sounds good until you realize it usually means the master decided they weren't worth keeping and kicked them out with no trade, no prospects, and years of their life wasted. And some, this is the part nobody talks about, some just break. The physical demands combined with the psychological weight of being at the bottom of a rigid hierarchy, subject to arbitrary punishment, with no real hope of advancement. It destroys people. You've seen it. There's an apprentice at another bakery who barely speaks anymore, just goes through the motions with dead eyes. Everyone knows he's not going to make it, but the system will grind away at him until he finally collapses or runs. You're wondering which category you'll end up in. Your master is inspecting the loaves you just shaped, and for once he seems satisfied. He gives a small nod, the closest thing to praise you'll get, and moves on. You're feeling that tiny spark of accomplishment, which is immediately depressing because your standards for satisfaction have dropped so low that didn't get yelled at counts as a win. Here's what the history books don't emphasize enough. The apprenticeship system was often sold to families as an opportunity, a chance for their sons, rarely daughters, though female apprentices existed in some trades, to learn a skilled profession and rise in the world. And technically, that was possible. Some apprentices did become successful masters, did open their shops, did make decent livings, but the odds were terrible. Most apprentices ended up as journeymen for life, or left the trade entirely, or died young from occupational hazards. The success stories were real, but they were the exceptions that proved the rule. The system was designed to benefit those already at the top, and everyone else was just feeding the machine. You're hauling another sack of flour, the good wheat this time, saved for the afternoon's premium loaves, and you're doing the math in your head. For more years of apprenticeship, then maybe 5 years as a journeyman, then who knows how long trying to pass the masterpiece examination. You could be 30 before you even have a chance at owning your own shop. Assuming you survive that long, assuming you can save enough money, assuming the guild accepts you. 30. You're 16 now. Half your life spent in service to a system designed to exploit you. But here's the really insidious part. You don't have any other options. You can't just quit and do something else. Your father paid good money to secure this apprenticeship. There's a contract, witnessed by the guild and blessed by the church. Breaking it would mean legal consequences, social disgrace, and probably physical punishment. You're bound to this until the 7 years are up, and then you're bound to the trade itself because it's all you know. The guild has you trapped, and everyone knows it, and that's exactly how they want it. You're mixing the wheat flour with water, and Thomas has appeared again with more cheerful information. You know why Master William took you on? He asks. You shake your head, focused on getting the dough consistency right. His last apprentice died, fell into the oven during a rush. Master needed a replacement fast, and your father's money was good. You stopped kneading, fell into the oven, Well, probably pushed. If you ask me, the kid was always screwing up, and the master was in a mood that day. But officially, accident. Guild investigated, found no wrongdoing. Just one of those things that happens in a bakery. He wanders off, leaving you with this delightful new information. You're trying to tell yourself he's exaggerating, making up stories to scare the new guy. But you're also remembering that the master has a temper, that the oven opening is right at waist height, that it would be very easy for someone to accidentally fall in during a scuffle. You're looking at that oven with new eyes now. It's not just a tool. It's a potential murder weapon. And you're working next to it for 16 hours a day with a man who might have already killed someone with it. The guild investigated and found no wrongdoing. Of course they did. A dead apprentice is bad PR. But a master baker accused of murder is worse. Better to rule it an accident, pay the family some token compensation, and move on. The system protects its own, and apprentices are not its own. You're shaping loaves with shaking hands now, and you're wondering if your father knew. Did he know about the previous apprentice? Did the master tell him? Or did he conveniently leave that detail out during negotiations? Would it have even mattered? Your father needed to place you somewhere, and this was an available position. Medieval career counseling is less about finding the right fit and more about finding any fit before you become a burden on the family. The afternoon light is slanting through the high windows, and you're realizing you've been working for almost 12 hours straight with one 4-minute break. Your back is screaming. Your arms are numb. Your feet hurt from standing on stone floors in wooden clogs. And you've got at least 4 more hours to go before the day's production ends. This is every day, for 4 more years. Assuming you survive. The guild system, with all its regulations and hierarchies and fees, suddenly seems less about preserving craftsmanship and more about preserving a social order where masters stay masters and everyone else stays exploited. And you're locked into it, bound by contract and custom and the simple fact that you have nowhere else to go. You're sliding another batch of loaves into the oven carefully, very carefully, staying well back from that opening, and you're making a promise to yourself. If you survive this, if you somehow make it through apprenticeship and journeyman years and the masterpiece examination, if you somehow become a master baker with your own shop, you're going to be different. You're going to treat your apprentices like human beings. Even as you think it, you know it's probably not true. The system grinds everyone down eventually. The abused become abusers. The exploited become exploiters. That's how it perpetuates itself, generation after generation, keeping everyone locked in their place while the guild masters grow fat on fees and fines. Welcome to medieval career advancement, brutal, rigged, and nearly impossible to escape. You're standing in front of the main oven again, and you're finally appreciating just how terrifying this thing actually is. It's not just a cooking appliance, it's a 7-foot-tall stone monstrosity that weighs several tons, runs at temperatures that could cremate a body, and has a documented history of killing people in creative ways. And you're expected to work inches from it, all day, every day, with medieval safety equipment that consists of try not to die. Welcome to oven technology, circa 1347, where everything is on fire and nothing is OSHA-approved. You're feeding more wood into the firebox, and you're studying the construction now with morbid fascination. The oven is basically a giant beehive made of stone and brick, with a domed interior that's supposed to distribute heat evenly. The walls are at least a foot thick, they have to be, to retain the massive amounts of heat needed for baking. The floor is made of special baking stones that cost more than your father makes in a year. And the whole structure sits on a raised platform because you need clearance underneath for air circulation, and also because hauling bread in and out of a ground-level oven would destroy your back even faster. The opening, that glowing mouth you're constantly shoving loaves into, is maybe 2 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Big enough to get several loaves in at once. small enough that the heat doesn't escape too quickly, and exactly the right size for a human body to fit through if someone were to, say, fall forward while loading bread. You're trying not to think about Thomas's story about the previous apprentice. The temperature inside is somewhere between 500 and 700 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on where in the baking cycle you are. There's no thermometer, obviously. Those won't be reliably manufactured for another century or so. Instead, you're using techniques passed down through generations. The color test, the hand test, the throw some flour on the floor and see how fast it burns test. All of them require getting uncomfortably close to temperatures that will immediately blister your skin. You're doing the hand test now, holding your palm near the opening. The radiant heat is like a physical force pushing against you. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Ms. You pull back. That's the sweet spot for bread. If you can hold it for 5 seconds, the oven's too cool. If you can't make it to 2, it's too hot and you'll burn the bottoms. This is your thermometer, your hand, and you're making this calculation dozens of times per day. And eventually you're going to misjudge, and eventually you're going to get burned. It's not if, it's when. Here's a cheerful mainstream historical fact. Burns were the second leading cause of death for medieval bakers, right after respiratory diseases. The records from London's Bakers' Guild document dozens of cases. Apprentices falling into ovens. Masters reaching too far in and catching their sleeves on fire. Journeymen getting splashed with boiling water used to create steam. It's a catalog of thermal horror, and you're actively participating in it. Your master is yelling something about the bread browning too fast on the left side, which means the fire isn't distributed evenly. You're grabbing the long iron poker, a rod about 6 feet long, that's used to push burning logs around inside the firebox and reaching into the inferno to redistribute the coals. The poker gets so hot from this that you can't hold the handle with bare hands. There's a rag wrapped around the end, which helps for about 30 seconds before it starts to smolder. You're pushing logs, trying to spread the heat, and you can feel the hair on your arms crisping from the radiant heat. The smell of burning hair joins the general bakery atmosphere of flour dust. With smoke and sweat, you're backing away as soon as the fire looks more even, and you're checking your arms for damage. Red, tender, but no blisters yet. That's a win. The oven design itself is actually pretty sophisticated for medieval technology. The dome shape creates a natural convection current. Hot air rises to the top of the dome, then radiates down evenly onto the bread below. The thick walls store enormous amounts of heat, which is released slowly and steadily during baking. It's essentially a massive thermal battery, and it works remarkably well, except when it doesn't. You're watching the stonework while you work, looking for cracks or signs of deterioration. Remember that inspector's comment about degraded mortar? That wasn't just a shakedown well. It was mostly a shakedown, but there's a real concern underneath it. These ovens are under constant thermal stress. They heat up to extreme temperatures, then cool down, then heat up again. Stone and mortar expand and contract. Over months and years, this creates cracks, and cracks are bad. A crack in the dome might cause a section to collapse, dropping several hundred pounds of hot stone onto whoever's working in front of the oven. A crack in the wall might let heat escape unevenly, ruining entire batches of bread. A crack in the floor might cause the baking stones to shift or break, creating hot spots that burn some loaves while undercooking others. But here's the fun part. Repairing an oven is expensive and time-consuming. You have to let it cool completely, which means shutting down the bakery for at least a full day. Then you need a mason who specializes in oven construction. Not just any mason will do. Then you need special heat-resistant mortar, which costs a fortune. Then you need to let the repairs cure properly before heating it up again. All told, a major oven repair might shut you down for 3 to 5 days and cost several months' profit. So masters tend to put off repairs as long as possible, running ovens that are increasingly dangerous because the alternative is lost revenue. You're literally gambling your life against your master's profit margin every time you work. You're loading another batch of loaves, using the long wooden peel to slide them onto the hot stone floor. This requires a technique that's harder than it looks. You have to give the peel a quick jerk and pull motion that deposits the loaf exactly where you want it without disturbing the other loaves already baking. Too timid and the loaf doesn't slide off. Too aggressive and it tumbles into another loaf, ruining both. And you have to do this while holding a 6-foot pole loaded with several pounds of dough, leaning into temperatures that are trying to cook your face. Your aim is getting better, but you still misjudge sometimes. There goes a loaf, tumbling off the side of the peel and landing awkwardly against another one. Both loaves are now misshapen. Your master sees it and makes a disgusted noise. Those will have to be sold as seconds at reduced price, and that's coming out of your theoretical future wages. Except you don't get wages as an apprentice, so really it's just another mark against you, another black spot in your master's mental ledger of your inadequacies. Accumulate enough of these and he might extend your apprenticeship by 6 months for insufficient skill development. It's perfectly legal, and there's nothing you can do about it. Here's a quirky little detail about medieval ovens that really captures the technology's character. They had personalities. Ask any baker and they'll tell you their oven has moods. This particular oven, you've learned, runs hot in the back left corner no matter what you do with the fire. It has a cold spot near the front right. The dome radiates more intensely on the right side than the left. You have to account for all of this when positioning loaves, creating a mental map of the oven's temperamental geography. Modern bakers with their precisely controlled electric or gas ovens will never understand this. You're not just baking bread. You're negotiating with a semi-sentient stone creature that might decide to burn everything or undercook everything based on factors you can't quite predict. You're pulling out a finished batch, and the bread looks good. Golden crust, good rise, no obvious disasters. You're stacking them carefully when you hear it. A sharp crack from inside the oven. Everyone freezes. Your master is rushing over, peering into the oven's interior. You're holding your breath. A crack forming during operation is worse than one forming while cool because the thermal stress is at its peak. If a section is going to collapse, it'll probably be now. The master is examining the dome, looking for the source of the sound. You're standing back, ready to run if several 100 pounds of stone decide to come down. Thomas is near the door, already calculating his escape route. The other apprentices are motionless, watching. Nothing happens. No collapse. No shower of stone fragments. No catastrophe. Just that one sharp crack. Your master lets out a breath and waves everyone back to work. False alarm. Probably just the mortar settling. Or maybe a small crack forming that will eventually become a big crack that will eventually kill someone. But that's a problem for future you to worry about. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen understood the engineering principles behind their constructions or just worked from accumulated practical experience. The oven builders probably couldn't explain thermal expansion coefficients or calculate stress loads, but they knew from generations of trial and error how thick to make walls, what materials to use, how to construct a dome that wouldn't collapse. It's practical physics without the theory effective but unpredictable. You're back to loading loaves, and you're thinking about all the ways this oven could kill you. Collapse is one option. Burns are another, but there's also steam explosions. When you want a crusty exterior on the bread, you create steam by throwing water onto the hot stone floor. The water flash boils, creating a burst of superheated steam that gelatinizes the starch on the bread's surface. It's a standard technique and it works great. It also occasionally causes explosions. If water hits a crack or fissure in the stone and gets trapped underneath, it can build up pressure until the stone shatters, sending shards of hot rock flying out of the oven like medieval shrapnel. You've heard stories of bakers losing eyes this way, taking fragments to the face, getting knocked unconscious by flying debris. It doesn't happen often, but it happens enough that you're very, very careful about where you pour the water. You're filling a ladle from the water bucket, approaching the oven opening, and scanning the floor for any suspicious cracks or holes. The stones look solid, so you're quickly flicking water onto the back area and jumping back as it explodes into steam. The cloud billows out, and for a moment you can't see anything. Then it clears, and everything is fine. The bread is getting its steam treatment, and you still have both eyes. Small victories. The heat is getting to you now. It's mid-afternoon, and you've been working near this thermal monster for over 12 hours. You're dizzy, probably dehydrated despite drinking water constantly, and your face feels like you spent the day under the desert sun. Heat exhaustion is a constant risk in bakeries, especially in summer. Right now it's winter, and the heat is almost welcome when you first arrive in the freezing pre-dawn. But after hours of exposure, it's overwhelming. You're swaying slightly, and your master notices. He barks at you to step outside for a moment, get some air. This isn't kindness, it's practical. A dizzy apprentice is likely to make mistakes, and mistakes cost money. Better to let you recover for 5 minutes than deal with ruined bread or, worse, an injury that would put you out of commission. You're stumbling out the back door into the alley, and the cold air hits you like a slap. The temperature difference is shocking, from maybe 95 degrees inside to perhaps 35 degrees outside. Your body doesn't know what to do with this. You're simultaneously shivering and sweating, your skin steaming in the winter air like you're some kind of human chimney. 5 minutes, your master said. You're leaning against the cold stone wall, trying to stabilize your core temperature, and you're looking at the bakery from the outside. It's a substantial building stone construction. Tile roof, proper chimney. This represents a serious investment. The oven alone probably cost more than most people's houses. The building, the location on a decent street, the guild membership fees, the inventory of tools and supplies, you're looking at a small fortune. And it all depends on that oven not collapsing, not exploding, not burning down the building. One catastrophic oven failure and your master is ruined. Everything gone. Which explains why he's so stressed all the time, why he puts off expensive repairs, why he pushes everyone so hard. He's one disaster away from losing everything, and the disaster is a constant possibility because the core technology of his business is a controlled explosion made of stone. You're heading back inside, and the heat slaps you again. Back to work. There's bread to make, and the oven waits for no one. The late afternoon brings a new challenge. The oven is starting to cool down. After running hot since 2 a.m., even with constant wood feeding, the temperature is gradually dropping. This is actually intentional. You want different temperatures for different breads. The hottest period is for crusty loaves that need high heat. As it cools, you bake softer breads, then pastries if you're fancy enough to make them. Then you might use the dying heat to dry fruit or make rusks. It's called falling heat baking, and it's an efficient use of the oven's stored energy. But it requires timing everything perfectly. You have to predict how fast the oven will cool, what temperature each bread type needs, and coordinate production so the right dough is ready at the right moment. Get it wrong, and you're either forcing dough that's not ready or letting dough overproof while you wait for the oven. You're checking the oven temperature again to Mississippi. Now you can hold your hand there longer. It's cooling. Your master is nodding. This is expected. He's pointing at a batch of enriched dough flour, eggs, butter, the luxury stuff that's ready for the cooler oven. You're shaping these into rolls, fancy ones for wealthy customers, and they need gentle heat that will cook them through without burning the egg-rich exterior. Into the oven they go, and you're watching them carefully because these are expensive. Screw up a batch of peasant bread and you lose a few pennies. Screw up the enriched rolls and you've wasted ingredients that cost as much as a week's food for a normal family. The oven is cooperating, and the rolls are rising beautifully, turning golden. You're pulling them out at exactly the right moment, and they're perfect. Your master actually looks pleased, which is so rare you're momentarily stunned. Enjoy it while you can. His mood will turn again in about 5 minutes. Here's what medieval bakers understood that modern ones had to rediscover: thermal mass matters. That thick stone oven holds heat for hours after the fire dies down. You can bank the coals, let the flames go out completely, and still have usable baking heat for another 2 or 3 hours. It's inefficient by modern standards, all that would just to heat up mass, but it works. And in a world without electricity or gas, this is what you have. The sun is getting low now, and you're entering the final phase of the day's baking. The oven is cool enough that you can actually reach inside without immediate burns, and you're using this window to clean the floor. You're taking a long-handled brush bristles made from some plant fiber that you don't want to think too hard about and sweeping out the ash and debris that accumulated during the day's baking. This is actually important. Ash on the baking floor can create hot spots, affect heat distribution, and leave marks on the bread bottoms. A clean floor means even baking, but cleaning it while it's still hot enough to bake is terrifying. You're reaching deep into the oven with this long brush, trying to sweep ash toward the opening where you can scoop it out, and you're very aware that your arms are inside a space that was 700 degrees a few hours ago and is still probably 300 degrees now. Your skin is screaming at you that this is a bad idea. Your survival instincts are screaming at you that this is a bad idea. But your master is watching, and this is part of the job. So you're doing it anyway. You're pulling out the ash still warm, nearly hot, and dumping it into a metal bucket. This ash isn't waste. By the way, it'll be sold to soap makers who use it for lye, or to farmers who use it for fertilizer, or to builders who mix it into certain types of mortar. Everything in a medieval economy gets used and reused until it's absolutely exhausted of value. The oven is clean, relatively speaking, and you're loading the last batch of the day. Simple barley loaves that need low heat and will bake slowly overnight as the oven finally cools completely. These are tomorrow morning's cheap bread, for customers who come at dawn looking for day-old loaves at reduced prices. You're closing the oven door, a heavy iron thing that seals the opening to trap the remaining heat, and your work with the oven is finally done. 15 hours of feeding it, monitoring it, loading and unloading it, negotiating with its temperamental heat distribution, and praying it doesn't kill you. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Your master is inspecting the oven exterior one more time before calling it a day. He's checking for cracks, testing the mortar, looking at the chimney. This is his most valuable asset, and he's as worried about it as you are, just for different reasons. You're worried it'll kill you. He's worried it'll bankrupt him. In this moment, you're both hostages to medieval technology, powerful, effective, and terrifyingly dangerous. You're finally stepping away from the oven, and you're noticing something weird happening with your breathing. Each inhale has this slight whistle to it, and there's a tickle deep in your lungs that makes you want to cough. You do cough, and what comes up is, well, it's gray. Flour gray. You're literally coughing up dough particles, and this is apparently just a normal part of your Tuesday. Welcome to the occupational hazards section of medieval baking, where the air is trying to kill you slowly and everything else is trying to kill you quickly. You're wiping your mouth, and your hand comes away with a mixture of spit and flour paste. Lovely. Your master glances over, sees you hacking, and just shrugs. You'll get used to it, he says, which is medieval workplace safety advice in a nutshell. Not we should improve ventilation or maybe wear a cloth over your mouth. Just get used to slowly destroying your lungs. The bakery air is thick with flour dust right now, it always is, but it's particularly bad at the end of a production day when everything's been stirred up. You're looking at the beams of late afternoon light coming through the high windows, and you can see the particles hanging in the air like snow that never falls. It's beautiful, in a way. It's also a respiratory death sentence. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Baker's lung, or pneumoconiosis, was so common among medieval bakers that it was just accepted as part of the trade. Medical texts from the period describe bakers with chronic coughs, wheezing, and progressive breathing difficulties. By age 40, many bakers were struggling to take deep breaths. By 50, if they lived that long, some were basically invalids, gasping for air with lungs that had turned into scarred, inflexible tissue, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't exactly filter the air. That technology doesn't exist. You can't wear a respirator, same problem. You could theoretically tie a cloth around your face, but then you can't breathe properly anyway, especially when doing heavy labor in intense heat. So you just breathe the flour dust, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, and hope your lungs hold out longer than most. You're sweeping the floor, now another cloud of flour dust rising with each stroke, and you're thinking about all the other ways this job is destroying your body. Your back is the obvious one. 16 hours a day of lifting flour sacks, hauling water buckets, kneading dough, and bending over the mixing trough. You're 16 years old and your back already hurts constantly. By the time you're 30, you'll probably be permanently bent. Your hands are another disaster. You're looking at them now, and they're cracked, bleeding in places, with calluses on top of calluses. The constant exposure to flour and water creates this paste that dries out your skin. Add in the heat from the oven, the occasional burn, and the general wear and tear of manual labor, and you've got hands that look like they belong to someone twice your age. There's a reason medieval bakers were often depicted with gnarled, twisted hands in illustrations. It wasn't artistic license, it was realistic portraiture. You're coughing again, and this time it's deeper, more productive. You're bringing up more gray sputum, and there's a burning sensation in your chest. Thomas notices and offers some helpful advice. Try to cough outside. Master doesn't like it when you spray flour spit on the bread. This is the level of health and safety concern you're dealing with. Not let's address the root cause of your respiratory distress, but don't contaminate the product with your lung discharge. The bakery itself is a chamber of hazards beyond just the flour dust. You're looking around with new awareness, cataloging all the ways this place could hurt you. The ceiling is low, maybe 8 feet, with heavy wooden beams that you've already cracked your head on twice this week. The floor is perpetually slippery with flour paste, water, and mysterious substances you don't want to identify. The walls are stone, which sounds sturdy until you remember that the mortar is old and chunks sometimes fall out, potentially onto your head. And then there are the tools. The long iron poker for the oven gets hot enough to brand you. The wooden peels develop splinters that can drive deep into your palms. The mixing bowls are heavy ceramic that will shatter if dropped, sending sharp fragments everywhere. The knives for scoring loaves are kept sharp enough to easily slice through fingers if you slip, which you will, because your hands are covered in flour paste and everything is slippery. You're watching another apprentice, the young one, maybe 14, hauling a flour sack that probably weighs half what he does. He's struggling, staggering, and you're thinking about hernias. Medieval medicine doesn't handle those well. Get a serious hernia from lifting something too heavy, and you're probably done working. You'll be a cripple begging on the streets, because there's no workers' compensation, no disability benefits, no safety net at all. The kid makes it to the storage area without collapsing. Lucky. Here's a quirky detail about medieval workplace safety, or the lack thereof. There were actually some regulations about apprentice labor, but they were mostly concerned with moral hazards, not physical ones. The guild rules specified that masters shouldn't work apprentices on holy days. They did anyway, and shouldn't abuse them excessively. That word, doing a lot of work there. But specific safety requirements, limits on hours, age-appropriate task assignments, Nothing. So you've got 14-year-olds hauling 100-pound sacks, 10-year-olds working near ovens hot enough to melt lead, and everyone breathing air that's more flour than oxygen. And it's all perfectly legal and normal. You're heading to the water bucket for a drink. Your throat is parched from the dry air and constant coughing. And you're noticing the rat situation has gotten worse. There are droppings near the flour storage, and you can hear scratching in the walls. Rats are inevitable in a bakery. You've accepted this. But they're also disease vectors, and medieval understanding of hygiene is minimal. The water you're drinking comes from a barrel that's been sitting in the corner for who knows how long. It's probably fine. Probably. You're not thinking about what might be growing in it or what might have fallen into it overnight. You're just drinking because dehydration will kill you faster than waterborne illness. Your master is yelling about something's found a rat-damaged sack of grain, and he's furious about the waste. He's ranting about the cost, about the lazy cat, about everything except the actual health hazard of rat infestation. Because again, the medieval priority is profit first, human welfare a distant second. You're helping to clean up the damaged grain, and you're trying not to think about what rat urine and droppings do to flour. Actually, you know exactly what they do because you've seen people get sick from contaminated grain. Fever, vomiting, sometimes worse. But you're going to sift this, mix it with clean flour to dilute the contamination, and bake it anyway because throwing out an entire sack is unthinkable. The economic calculation is always the same. The definite cost of waste versus the possible cost of someone getting sick. And people getting sick is just normal. Everyone's sick with something all the time in medieval society. Who's to say it was the bread? Could have been the water, the air, evil humors, divine punishment for sin. Probably not the bread. You're sifting the contaminated flour through a coarse screen, and you're watching rat droppings fall through along with the grain. Some of the droppings are caught by the screen. Most aren't. This is medieval quality control, and you're part of the system now, a participant in the slow poisoning of your community. Your hands are itching, and you're scratching at them absent-mindedly. The flour paste has dried into a thick layer, and underneath your skin is angry and inflamed. This is flour itch, another occupational hazard. Some bakers develop actual allergic reactions to flour over time, their bodies finally rebelling against the constant exposure. Their hands break out in rashes, their skin cracks and bleeds, and eventually they can't work with flour at all. Imagine that, spending 7 years learning a trade, then developing an allergy to your primary material. Your career is over, just like that. Thomas is scratching too, everyone is. There's a constant background activity in the bakery, all the workers scratching at flour-irritated skin like a chorus of itchy despair. You'd think someone would figure out that maybe coating your hands in flour paste all day is bad for skin health, but that knowledge is either unknown or ignored. Probably ignored, because what's the alternative? Gloves don't exist for this kind of work. You need tactile feedback to judge dough consistency, to feel when bread is properly kneaded, to sense temperature. Gloves would make you useless, so you scratch and suffer and hope you're not one of the unlucky ones who develops a full allergic reaction. You're moving flour sacks again. This is about the 50th time today, and you're feeling something pop in your lower back. Not a big pop, just a small one, but it's followed by a sharp pain that makes you gasp. You're frozen for a moment, waiting to see if this is a minor strain or something worse. The pain settles into a dull ache. Probably just a strain. Probably fine. You're straightening up slowly, testing the movement, and yeah, it hurts, but you can still function. So you keep working because the alternative is admitting injury, which might get you sent home without pay, or worse, marked as weak and unreliable. Medieval workers learn to hide injuries and work through pain because showing weakness has consequences. Your master needs productive workers, not damaged ones. If you can't keep up, there are other apprentices who can. Your contract might be extended for failure to meet standards. You might be released early with no compensation and no completed training. So you work through the pain, like everyone else. The other apprentices all have their own chronic issues. Thomas has a persistent cough worse than yours that he's had for 2 years. The young one has burn scars up and down both arms from oven work. The fourth apprentice, who you barely know because he works opposite shifts, apparently has something wrong with his hands that makes them shake. But he's still here, still working, because the alternative is destitution. Historians still argue whether medieval people had a higher pain tolerance than modern humans or just no choice but to endure. Probably the latter. When there's no healthcare beyond folk remedies and prayer, when there's no safety net, when your survival depends on your ability to work, you develop a remarkable capacity to function through injuries that would send modern people to the emergency room. You're kneading dough again, there's always more dough to knead, and you're noticing the tremor in your hands. Muscle fatigue from hours of repetitive motion. Your forearms are burning, your shoulders are tight, and your hands feel like they're going to cramp into permanent claws. This is the beginning of the kind of repetitive stress injuries that will plague you for life if you stay in this trade. Baker's hands, baker's back, baker's lung. The profession comes with its own set of branded ailments, like medals you didn't want to earn. The light is fading outside, and someone's lit the oil lamps inside the bakery. They don't provide much light, maybe equivalent to a modern 20-watt bulb, but they add smoke and smell to the already questionable air quality. You're working in dim, flickering light that makes it hard to see what you're doing, hard to spot hazards, easy to make mistakes that lead to injuries. You're squinting at the dough you're shaping, trying to judge by feel more than sight because the lighting is useless. This is how accidents happen. You misjudge a knife stroke and slice your finger. You don't see the uneven floor and twist your ankle. You mistake one ingredient for another and ruin a batch or poison someone. But oil is expensive and candles are expensive, so you work in near darkness and adapt or get hurt. Your eyes are burning now, from the smoke and flour dust, and probably the beginning of what will be chronic eye irritation. Many bakers develop eye problems, infections, inflammation, progressive vision loss from years of working in these conditions. By the time they're 40, some are half-blind, squinting at their work, relying on touch and memory more than sight. You're rubbing your eyes, which just grinds more flour dust into them, making it worse. Your tears are streaking through the flour on your face, leaving tracks like you've been crying. Maybe you have been. A little. It's been a long day. The young apprentice is coughing now. A wet, rattling sound that makes you wince. He's too young for baker's lung to be setting in, but that cough doesn't sound good. Could be consumption tuberculosis, which runs rampant in medieval society and especially in close quarters like bakeries. Could be pneumonia. Could be any number of respiratory infections that will either kill him or permanently damage his lungs. Your master hears the cough and frowns, not with concern, but with annoyance. A sick apprentice is a liability. Can't work as hard. Might infect others. Might die, which means the master has to find a replacement and train them from scratch. Get that seen to, the master says, which is rich because there's no getting it seen to unless you can afford a physician, which apprentices cannot, or you try folk remedies from someone's grandmother. Most likely, the kid will just cough until it either gets better or kills him. You're thinking about all the former apprentices you've heard about in stories. The ones who died from infections, from accidents, from cumulative damage to their bodies. The Bakery Guild keeps records, sort of, but they're more concerned with documenting dues paid and fines levied than tracking worker deaths. An apprentice dies, the master reports it. There might be an investigation if it seems suspicious, and then everyone moves on. No death benefits for the family. No compensation. Just a note in a ledger somewhere that an apprentice position is vacant. You're sweeping again, always sweeping, and you're stirring up more clouds of flour dust that glow in the lamplight like toxic snow. Your lungs are protesting, your back is screaming, your hands are bleeding, and you've got at least another hour before the day ends. This is every day. This is your life for 4 more years. And if you survive the apprenticeship, you get to continue destroying your body as a journeyman, then as a master if you're lucky enough to advance. The medieval baking profession, where the main qualification for advancement is not dying. You're finally finishing up the day's production, and you're thinking the worst is behind you. Then your master drops a ledger on the table with a heavy thud and announces that tomorrow the price inspectors are coming. Your stomach drops faster than a failed loaf. Price inspectors mean the assize of bread is being enforced. And the assize of bread means you're about to navigate a regulatory nightmare designed to ensure bakers starve while customers complain anyway. Welcome to medieval price controls, where the math never works and everyone wants you dead. You're staring at the ledger while your master explains tomorrow's disaster. The town council has decreed based on current grain prices exactly how much a loaf of bread should cost and exactly how much it should weigh. These 2 numbers are calculated by officials who have never baked a loaf in their lives, using economic theories that make astrology look rigorous. And you have to comply perfectly or face fines, public humiliation, or worse. Here's how the assize of bread works. In all its medieval bureaucratic glory, the authorities determine the current price of grain, usually wheat, since that's the standard. Then they calculate how much bread a baker should be able to produce from a given quantity of grain. Then they set the maximum price for a loaf based on this calculation, supposedly allowing the baker a reasonable profit margin. Sounds fair, right? Except the calculations are completely divorced from reality. You're looking at the numbers your master is showing you. According to the official decree, a quarter of wheat, that's about 480 pounds, should produce approximately 252-pound loaves of white bread. Do the math. That's 500 pounds of bread from 480 pounds of grain. You're apparently supposed to gain 20 pounds of product through the magical process of baking, which removes moisture and makes things lighter. This is the first sign that the officials have no idea what they're doing. Your master is walking you through the reality. A quarter of wheat, after milling, produces maybe 320 pounds of flour. You lose a third to bran and waste. That flour, when mixed with water and other ingredients, yields maybe 400 pounds of dough. That dough, when baked, loses about 20% of its weight to moisture evaporation. So you're actually getting around 320 pounds of finished bread from 480 pounds of grain. The authorities expect 500 pounds. You can produce 320 pounds. You're supposed to make up the 180-pound shortfall through what? Prayer? Alchemy? And that's assuming everything goes perfectly. No burned loaves. No contaminated grain requiring extra processing. No variations in moisture content. No losses to rats or spillage or the 1,000 other things that go wrong in a bakery. But here's the fun part. The price is fixed based on the official calculation. If you can't produce the impossible amount of bread they've calculated, you either lose money on every loaf or you reduce the weight to maintain profit margins. And if you reduce the weight, that's a violation of the assize. The inspectors will catch you, fine you, and possibly drag you to the pillory for public shaming. You're trapped between economic impossibility and legal punishment. Your master is showing you his strategy, which is the same strategy every baker uses. Cheat carefully. You bake loaves that are juiced under the official weight, not so light that customers immediately notice, but light enough that you can actually make a profit. Then you hope the inspectors don't check too carefully, or that you can negotiate when they find violations, or that you can pay the fine and it won't bankrupt you. This is business as usual in medieval baking. The regulations are impossible to follow, so everyone breaks them, and the enforcement is selective and corrupt, and the whole system lurches along on a foundation of semi-legal corner cutting and bribery. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The assize of bread was one of the longest-lasting price control systems in European history, enforced in England from the 1200s until the 1800s. 6 centuries of bakers trying to navigate impossible regulations while authorities wondered why bread quality was so inconsistent and bakers seemed so criminally inclined. Maybe, just maybe, it was the system that was broken. You're helping your master prepare for tomorrow's inspection. This involves weighing sample loaves on the bakery scale, which is probably rigged, like everyone's scale, and seeing how close you are to the official standard. The scale shows loaves at about 1.9 pounds when the requirement is 2 pounds. Close, but not close enough. Your master is calculating. Can you increase the weight slightly without destroying profit margins? Can you bake a special batch just for the inspectors, heavier than what you actually sell? Can you bribe the inspectors to overlook minor discrepancies? These are your options when the law is impossible to follow. Become creative with compliance. The economic pressure is crushing. Grain prices fluctuate wildly. A bad harvest can double or triple prices within weeks. But the assize doesn't adjust quickly. There's bureaucratic delay between when grain prices rise and when the bread price is officially changed. During that gap, you're forced to sell bread at old prices using expensive grain, losing money on every loaf. And if you try to pass costs to customers by reducing loaf weight to maintain the price, illegal. If you raise prices without official authorization, illegal. If you refuse to bake because you're losing money, also illegal. Bakers have an obligation to provide bread to the community. You're legally required to lose money during grain price spikes. It's a system designed by people who think bakers are wealthy merchants price gouging the poor, when in reality most bakers are barely solvent. One bad season away from ruin. Your master is explaining the political reality behind the assize. The urban poor who spend 70% of their income on bread are always one price increase away from rioting. Literally rioting. Medieval bread riots were serious affairs with burning buildings and hanging merchants. So the authorities keep bread prices artificially low to prevent civil unrest. And bakers absorb the cost because they're easier to control than mobs. You're the economic shock absorber for social stability. You take the hit so lords and town councils don't face angry crowds. Here's a quirky detail that really captures the absurdity. Different types of bread had different assize calculations. White bread, whole wheat bread, barley bread each had its own official price based on different assumed conversion ratios. The authorities actually believed that wheat bread should weigh more than barley bread made from the same amount of grain because wheat is richer. This is metabolically backwards, but it's what they enforced. So you had to navigate multiple price regulations depending on what you were baking, each one equally divorced from reality. You're looking at the customer side of this equation now. Your master is explaining how customers enforce the assize themselves. Anyone who buys bread can demand to weigh it right there in the shop. If it's underweight, they can complain to authorities. Some people make a sport of it, buying loaves, weighing them publicly, and calling out bakers for short weight. And the penalty for selling underweight bread? It varies. Sometimes a fine, sometimes confiscation of the bread, which is given to the poor. Nice in theory, humiliating for you. Sometimes public punishment. You've heard stories of bakers dragged through the streets on a sledge with underweight loaves hanging around their necks while crowds pelt them with garbage. The medieval version of going viral, except instead of internet shame, it's actual rotten vegetables to the face. Your master is particularly worried about one regular customera, local busybody, who brings his own scale to the bakery and weighs every purchase. If he finds discrepancies, he reports them. He's gotten 3 bakers fined in the past year. He's coming tomorrow. Your master is certain, because word spreads when inspectors are in town. So tomorrow you'll bake bread that meets the impossible standard, just for this one customer and the inspectors, while selling your normal slightly underweight loaves to everyone else and praying you don't get caught in the switcheroo. Historians still argue whether the assize of bread actually helped the poor or just created an elaborate system of fines and punishments that stressed bakers without meaningfully lowering prices. The evidence suggests the latter. Bread prices remained high despite the assize. Bakers regularly violated it, and the main effect was creating a secondary economy of bribes and fines. But it made authorities look like they were doing something about food prices, and that political theater was the real point. You're moving to the storage area where your master keeps his special occasion flour, the good stuff, reserved for when he needs to impress inspectors or important customers. This is going into tomorrow's demonstration loaves. Premium wheat flour, carefully sifted, mixed with precise amounts of water to maximize weight while maintaining texture. You're learning the art of regulatory compliance through selective quality variation. The bread you show inspectors is better than what you sell to regular customers. Not because you're trying to deceive them about quality, though you are, but because you're trying to hit an impossible weight target that's only achievable with premium ingredients and careful preparation. The regular customers get bread made with cheaper flour, extended with barley or rye, mixed with less precision because you're making hundreds of loaves and can't give each one special attention. It's still bread. It's still edible. It's just not what the regulations envision. Your master is calculating costs obsessively. If he uses premium flour for the inspector's loaves and regular flour for everyone else, and if the inspector only checks a few loaves, and if the busybody customer can be redirected to a good batch, then maybe can navigate tomorrow without fines. This is what medieval business looks like. Elaborate schemes to avoid impossible regulations while maintaining enough actual quality that you don't poison anyone or trigger riots. You're thinking about the other side of this equation, the genuine poor people who depend on cheap bread for survival. The assize is supposed to protect them from price gouging. But by making it impossible for bakers to operate profitably during high grain prices, the assize actually reduces bread supply. Some bakers just close shop temporarily rather than lose money. Others reduce quality even further than they otherwise would, trying to hit price points with cheaper ingredients. The poor end up with less bread, or worse bread, or both. The law designed to help them makes things worse. But it feels like the authorities are doing something, and that political optics matter more than actual outcomes. You're preparing dough for tomorrow's special loaves, and your master is watching critically. The consistency has to be perfect. The water content precisely calculated to maximize weight without making the bread soggy. You're adding water in tiny increments, kneading, testing the texture, adding more. This is bread making as precision chemistry, except you're doing it by feel in a medieval bakery using ingredients of inconsistent quality and tools calibrated by wishful thinking. The dough feels right. Your master pokes it, stretches it, nods approval. This batch might just save you from fines tomorrow. You're setting it to proof overnight, carefully covered to prevent drying, in a spot where temperature is consistent. Tomorrow's success depends on this dough rising properly, baking evenly, and weighing exactly right when the inspectors arrive. No pressure. Your master is pulling out the official weight standardized measures that the guild provides to all bakers. These are what the inspectors will use to check your loaves. They're supposed to be accurate, but there's a rumor that some bakers file them down slightly so their personal weights show loaves as heavier than they actually are. Your master's weights look suspiciously shiny, like they've been polished or filed. You're not asking questions. He's demonstrating tomorrow's procedure. When the inspector arrives, you'll bring out fresh loaves from the premium batch. You'll weigh them on the official scale using the official weights. They should come out at exactly 2 pounds, maybe a hair over to show good faith. The inspector will nod, make notes, probably still find some minor violation to justify his visit, but nothing major. Meanwhile, the regular loaves will be in the back, carefully hidden from view, waiting to be sold to customers who don't bring scales and don't complain to authorities. This is sophisticated regulatory arbitrage, medieval style. You're cleaning up for the night, and your master is giving you final instructions for tomorrow. Be polite to the inspector. Don't volunteer information. If asked direct questions, answer truthfully but minimally. Don't mention the quality variations. Don't mention the weight inconsistencies. Definitely don't mention the possibly filed official weights. Just smile, show the good loaves, and hope the whole charade passes without incident. You're thinking about the fundamental injustice of the system. The lords and officials who create these regulations don't face their consequences. If grain prices spike, they don't go hungry, they have wealth and reserves. The poor suffer, but they blame bakers, not the system. And bakers, caught in the middle, get squeezed from both sides. The assize of bread is supposed to balance interests. Consumers get fair prices, bakers get fair profits, authorities maintain order. In reality, creates a situation where everyone cheats, everyone complains, and the most vulnerable still suffer while the system grinds on. Your master is locking up the premium flour, the special weights, the demonstration loaves. Tomorrow's theater requires props, and these are carefully guarded. You're heading toward your sleeping space, a corner of the bakery where apprentices bed down, and you're thinking about price controls, impossible regulations, and how medieval commerce runs on elaborate workarounds to laws that make no sense. Welcome to the assize of bread, where the math is wrong, the penalties are real, and everyone's guilty of something. You're waking up even earlier than usual 1:30 a.m. instead of 2:00 because today's the inspection and your master wants everything perfect before the officials arrive. You're stumbling through the dark streets again, but this time the anxiety is sharper. Today isn't just about making bread. Today's about performing bread, putting on a show convincing enough that you don't end up in the pillory with loaves tied around your neck. Welcome to the actual enforcement of the assize of bread, where scales become weapons and bread weight becomes a legal battlefield. You're arriving at the bakery, and your master is already there, looking more stressed than you've ever seen him. He's arranged the workspace differently, the good loaves prominently displayed, the regular ones hidden in the back storage. The official scale is polished and positioned where inspectors can easily access it. The weights are laid out like surgical instruments. Everything is staged. This is bakery as theater, and you're about to perform for an audience that can destroy you. The special dough from last night has risen beautifully. You're shaping these loaves with more care than you've ever applied to bread. Each one has to be identical, exactly 2 pounds after baking, which means approximately 4 pounds of dough to account for moisture loss. You're weighing each unbaked loaf 3 times to ensure precision. Your hands are steadier than they should be, given the stakes. Maybe fear has sharpened your focus. Maybe you're just too exhausted to shake anymore. Into the oven they go, and you're monitoring temperature even more obsessively than usual. Too hot and they'll lose extra moisture, coming out underweight. Too cool and they'll be pale and doughy. Obviously inferior quality even if the weight is right. You need the Goldilocks zone of baking temperature, which you're determining by holding your hand near a 600-degree opening and counting Mississippis. Medieval precision baking, equal parts skill and prayer. Your master is pacing. He's recalculating costs, muttering numbers under his breath. These premium loaves are expensive to produce. The flour alone costs 3 times what he normally spends. If he has to sell bread at this quality level all the time while maintaining assize prices, he'll be bankrupt in months. The inspection system forces him to prove he can meet standards he can't afford to maintain. It's a trap, and everyone knows it, and everyone pretends it makes sense. The sun isn't even up yet when the first inspector arrives. Not the official town inspector, that would be too straightforward. This is a guild pre-inspector, sent by the Bakers Guild itself to check that you're ready for the official inspection. Yes, you're being inspected before the inspection. The guild wants to minimize violations because too many fines make the entire profession look bad. It's quality control for regulatory compliance. A layer of bureaucracy that would be hilarious if your livelihood didn't depend on it. The guild inspector is Master Robert from 3 streets over, a competing baker who's probably delighted to find violations. He's walking through the bakery with this expression of professional skepticism, touching everything, examining everything, looking for problems. He picks up one of the premium loaves cooling on the rack. Your master tenses. The inspector bounces it in his hand. Testing weight by field bakers developed this sense after years of practice. He frowns. Might be light, he says. Your master immediately offers to weigh it. They walk to the scale together, and you're holding your breath. The loaf goes on the balance. The official 2-pound weight goes on the other side. The scale tips toward the bread. It's heavy. Relief washes over your master's face. My mistake, the guild inspector says, but he doesn't sound apologetic. He sounds disappointed he didn't find a violation. He's checking the oven now, examining the mortar that was just cited as degraded by the previous inspection. Your master explains it's been repaired, which is a lie. Hasn't. But he's betting the inspector won't remember the exact location of the degradation or care enough to verify. The inspector grunts non-committally and moves on. Here's what's really happening. The guild inspector is looking for serious violations that would embarrass the guild in front of town officials. Minor issues, slightly questionable mortar. Marginal cleanliness will overlook because they make the official inspection go smoother. It's professional courtesy mixed with self-interest. The guild's reputation depends on its members appearing competent, even if that requires some creative blindness. The guild inspector is finishing his rounds. He's found nothing catastrophic, which means your master passed the pre-inspection. He leaves with a curt nod, and now you wait for the real thing. You're baking more premium loaves because you can't be sure how many the official inspector will want to check. Each one is a small fortune in ingredients, but the alternative is fines that cost even more. Your master is hemorrhaging money to prove he's not cheating, which he absolutely is, just not in ways that can be easily detected. The irony is thick enough to slice with a bread knife. The official town inspector arrives at 7 a.m. with an assistant carrying a record book and a set of official weights that are supposedly more accurate than the guild-provided ones. Everything is about to be measured against different standards, and you're praying the discrepancy isn't significant. This inspector is a town official, not a baker. He's a bureaucrat who knows regulations but has never kneaded dough in his life. He's consulting a scroll with the current assize calculations, reading off numbers like they're holy scripture. 2-pound loaves of white wheat bread, priced at 1 penny 3 farthings, based on wheat at 5 shillings per quarter. He announces. Your master nods deferentially. Inside, he's calculating. Those numbers are already outdated. Wheat has gone up to 5 shillings 6 pence in the past week. But the assize hasn't adjusted. He's already losing money at the official price, and now he has to prove he can maintain weight standards while using more expensive grain. The trap tightens. The inspector is selecting loaves at random or what appears random, though your master has carefully positioned the premium ones where they're most likely to be chosen. First loaf, onto the official scale. The inspector's weight goes on the opposite side. The scale balances perfectly. Acceptable, the inspector notes, and his assistant writes it down. Second loaf. Third loaf. All acceptable. You're starting to think you might actually survive this. Then the inspector's assistant mutters something and points to the back storage area. He's spotted the regular loaves, the ones made with cheaper flour and lighter weights. The inspector's eyebrow raises. Let's check those as well, he says. Your master's face goes pale. Historians still argue whether medieval inspectors were genuinely trying to protect consumers or just collecting revenue through fines. The evidence suggests both, inconsistently applied based on politics, bribes, and personal whims. An inspector might overlook violations from a baker who's well-connected or has paid appropriate consulting fees. Another baker, less favored, gets hammered for minor discrepancies. Justice, medieval style, flexible and profitable. The inspector is walking to the back storage, and your master is scrambling for an explanation. Those are second-quality loaves for customers who request lower price points. He improvises, not covered under the standard size, more of a custom arrangement. The inspector looks skeptical. He picks up one of the regular loaves, and even by hand, it's obviously lighter. He weighs it anyway. 7 pounds, significantly under the 2-pound standard. This is a violation, the inspector states flatly. Your master is arguing that it's a different product category, that customers specifically request these, that the assize shouldn't apply to specialized goods. The inspector is unmoved. A loaf is a loaf, and weight standards apply uniformly. He's writing in his ledger, violation of assize, sale of underweight bread, fine assessed. The damage is done. But here's where it gets interesting. The fine isn't immediate. The inspector is explaining that your master can appeal, can provide evidence of different product categories, can argue his case before the town council at next month's meeting. In the meantime, the alleged violation stands on record, and if the appeal fails, the fine will be assessed with interest. It's bureaucratic torture punishment delayed but hanging over you, accruing consequences. Your master is doing rapid political calculation. Appeal and risk drawing more attention to his practices, or accept the fine and factor it into business costs. He's choosing the latter. Better to pay and move on than invite deeper scrutiny. I accept the finding, he says quietly. The fine will be paid. The inspector nods, makes a note, and continues his inspection. He's checking the oven structure. Now apparently town inspectors also enforce safety regulations, because why not pile all regulatory burdens on one visit? He's found the degraded mortar that the guild inspector missed. Another violation, another fine. He's checking flour storage and found evidence of rat damage. Violation, inadequate pest control. Fine. He's checking the water barrel and deemed it insufficiently covered. Violation, potential contamination risk. Fine. By the time he's finished, your master has accumulated 5 violations and corresponding fines totaling nearly 2 weeks of profit. This is enforcement as revenue generation, and you're the cash crop. The inspector is preparing to leave when that busybody customer, the one with his own scale, arrives for his morning bread. Perfect timing. He's immediately asking to weigh his purchase, and he's brought his scale as promised. Your master is serving him one of the premium loaves, praying the customer's scale agrees with the official weights. The customer places the loaf on his scale, adjusts the counterweight, squints at the balance. Seems right, he admits, sounding almost disappointed. The inspector observes this transaction with approval. Good to see customers verifying their purchases. He comments, keeps bakers honest. Your master is smiling through gritted teeth. The customer is nodding sanctimoniously. You're watching this performance and understanding that the assize isn't really about bread weight, it's about power dynamics, about authorities demonstrating control, about customers feeling protected even when they're not. The inspector finally leaves, and your master slumps against the wall. The morning's fines are devastating but survivable. Barely. He's calculating how to recoup the losses, reduce quality slightly, decrease weights marginally, hope the next inspection isn't for several months. The cycle continues. You're back to regular production now, baking the normal loaves with their slightly underweight portions and cheaper ingredients. The premium flour is locked away again until the next inspection. The staged performance is over, and reality resumes. Here's a quirky detail that captures the absurdity. Some towns had a position called the ale conner or bread weigher, an official whose entire job was checking bread weights and ale quality. They'd go from bakery to bakery, tavern to tavern, testing products. In some places, they were paid by the violation of commission system that incentivized finding problems. Imagine your regulatory compliance is judged by someone who profits from your failures. Your master is explaining the appeal process to you, even though he's not actually appealing. Apparently, you have to submit a written petition to the town council, provide evidence supporting your case, possibly hire someone literate to argue on your behalf if you can't read and write yourself. The whole process costs money, fees for filing, fees for the council's time, fees for witnesses if you need them. So appealing a fine often costs as much as just paying the fine, with no guarantee of success. It's a system designed to make compliance easier than resistance. You're thinking about the fundamental injustice. The regulations assume bakers are trying to cheat customers, when really they're trying to survive impossible economic constraints. The assize prices don't account for waste, spoilage, fuel costs, labor, or any of the actual expenses of running a bakery. They're based on theoretical calculations by people who've never produced anything. And when reality doesn't match theory, bakers get punished for the discrepancy. The rest of the day proceeds normally if you can call 16 hours of brutal labor normal. You're baking regular loaves, selling to regular customers, and trying not to think about how many of them would happily report you for violations if they knew what to look for. Your master is quieter than usual, calculating in his head. 2 weeks of profit, gone. He'll need to make it up somehow. Maybe by extending your apprenticeship another 6 months free labor to offset losses. Maybe by reducing everyone's already meager food rations. Maybe by taking fewer precautions with grain quality, risking contamination to save costs. The fines get passed down the hierarchy until they hit someone who can't pass them further. Usually apprentices. You're closing up for the night, and your master is staring at the ledger where he's recorded today's violations and fines. He looks older, more defeated. This is what the assize does. Grinds down bakers year after year, inspection after inspection, until they're broken or bankrupt or both. Tomorrow we go back to normal. He says finally. Can't afford to bake like this regularly. Just be more careful with the weights. Not too light, but not wastefully heavy either. Find the line. The line between legal compliance and economic survival. The line between feeding your community and feeding yourself. The line that every medieval baker walks daily, knowing one misstep means public humiliation or worse. You're nodding, understanding. The inspection is over, but its shadow remains. Every loaf you bake now carries the weight of potential violation, potential fine, potential punishment. Welcome to the assize of bread enforcement, where everyone cheats, everyone knows it, and the system perpetuates anyway because it serves power more than people. You're finally getting a day off, except you're not, because it's Sunday and the church has declared this a mandatory day of rest, which means you're legally forbidden from working. This sounds great until you realize that rest in medieval terms means attending multiple church services, confessing your sins to a priest who's probably going to ask uncomfortable questions about your bread-making practices, and generally spending your non-working hours being reminded that you're a sinner destined for hell unless you comply with about 70 different religious regulations. Welcome to holy days and baking sins, where even your time off is controlled and your profession is morally suspect. You're trudging to church at dawn because apparently rest starts at sunrise and you're so exhausted that you're barely conscious. Your master is walking ahead with the other bakers from the neighborhood, all of them looking equally zombie-like. Behind you are the apprentices, a shuffling column of flour-dusted young men who'd rather be sleeping but have no choice in the matter. The church bells are ringing, calling the faithful to Mass, and you're wondering if this counts as rest when your feet hurt just as much as they do during work. The church is cold, drafty, and packed with people who smell like their respective professions. You can identify trades by scent. The tanners reek of urine and rot. The butchers smell like blood and fat. The dyers have that chemical stink. And you and your fellow bakers carry the yeasty, smoky aroma of the oven. It's like a medieval scratch and sniff of occupational hazards. You're finding a spot on the hard wooden bench, no pews, just planks, and preparing for at least 2 hours of standing, sitting, kneeling, and trying not to fall asleep during the sermon. The priest is beginning Mass in Latin, which you don't understand. Nobody understands it except the clergy and maybe some wealthy merchants who've had education. But you're expected to participate anyway, responding at the right moments with phrases you've memorized phonetically without knowing their meaning. It's religion as performance, and you're an actor who doesn't know his lines. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The medieval Catholic Church designated over 60 holy days per year when work was forbidden, not counting Sundays. That's over 110 days annually when bakers legally couldn't bake. Except people still needed bread, which created a massive theological and economic problem that everyone solved by quietly ignoring the rules and then confessing their sins later. The system ran on hypocrisy, and everyone knew it. You're half listening to the sermon, which has somehow turned into a lecture about the sins of tradesmen. The priest is talking about dishonest merchants, cheating craftsmen, and oh good, here it comes bakers who sell underweight bread and contaminate flour with inferior grains. He's staring directly at the baker section of the church while he says this. Subtle. Your master is staring straight ahead. Expression neutral, but you can see the tension in his jaw. Yesterday's inspection is fresh in everyone's mind, and now the priest is essentially calling out bakers as a profession of sinners, which is rich, considering the church demands its tithe of grain regardless of quality or market prices, contributing to the very problems the priest is condemning. The priest is really warming to his theme now. He's describing the special place in hell reserved for bakers who cheat their customers. Apparently there's a level where you're forced to eat your own underweight, contaminated bread for eternity while demons stoke fires that burn like bread ovens. It's creative theology. You'll give him that. You're shifting uncomfortably on the bench, and you're thinking about all the ways your profession is considered morally questionable. Bakers work at night suspicious, since honest people work during daylight. Bakers control access to a necessity potential for exploitation. Bakers handle the community's food supply opportunity for poisoning, deliberate or accidental. In the medieval moral economy, you're basically one step above grave robbers. The sermon is ending with a call for honest labor and true Christian charity. The priest is reminding everyone that their earthly work should reflect God's glory, not their greed. He's looking at the bakers again when he says greed. You're mentally calculating how much the church has extracted from your master this year in tithes, fees for blessing the oven, payments for holy day dispensations, and various other religious charges. The church talks about greed while running what's essentially a spiritual protection racket. But you can't say this out loud because that would be heresy, and heresy has consequences that make the pillory look pleasant. Mass is ending, and you're filing out with everyone else. But your master is being stopped by the priest, who wants a private word. This is never good. You're waiting outside with the other apprentices, watching through the door as the priest and your master have what looks like an intense conversation. Your master emerges looking grim. He wants a donation for the parish poor box. He mutters, "To compensate for my irregular business practices and demonstrate proper Christian charity." Translation: the priest heard about the inspection violations and wants his cut. It's not enough that the town fined your master, now the church wants payment too. Different authority, same result. You're being squeezed from all sides. Here's a quirky detail about medieval religious economics. The church had elaborate rules about just price and usury that were supposed to prevent exploitation. But these same rules created situations where bakers were expected to sell bread at prices that didn't cover costs, especially during grain shortages. If you tried to charge more even to avoid bankruptcy, the church could accuse you of usury or unjust pricing. You were supposed to take the loss and trust God to provide, which is lovely spiritual advice but terrible business strategy. You're heading back toward the bakery, but not to work, that's forbidden. Instead, you're going to do maintenance, which is the loophole every tradesman uses. You can't produce goods on holy days, but you can prepare for future production. So you'll be mixing dough that won't be baked until after midnight when Sunday technically ends. You'll be cleaning equipment. You'll be organizing supplies. You'll be working, just not calling it work. Your master is explaining the holy day economics to you as you walk. Every Sunday and holy day costs the bakery a full day of production, but customers still need bread. So you have to work twice as hard on permitted days to build up inventory. Or you work illegally on forbidden days and risk punishment. Or you buy a dispensation from the church allowing limited work. That last option costs money. Of course, everything costs money. You're arriving at the bakery, and there are already other bakers sneaking into their shops through back doors. Everyone's doing maintenance. Everyone's preparing for tomorrow's work. Everyone's technically not breaking the rules while absolutely breaking the rules. The church knows. The authorities know. Everyone knows. But the system requires this performance of compliance. This pretense that holy days are respected even as they're violated. Inside the bakery, you're mixing dough while your master keeps watch for any zealous church officials who might decide to enforce the rules today. The dough is for tomorrow. Technically, you're just preparing it. Except you're preparing enough for several days because you'll lose another holy day later this week, some saint's feast day that nobody actually knows anything about except that work is forbidden. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of holy days was genuinely about piety or about church control over economic activity. The pattern suggests control. The church could grant dispensations, charge fees for exceptions, and generally insert itself into every commercial transaction through the mechanism of mandatory rest days. Rest as a form of power. You're kneading dough with half your usual energy because you're exhausted and this is supposed to be your day off. Your hands move mechanically, your mind wandering to the confession you'll have to make this afternoon. Confession is mandatory, and you have to admit your sins. But which sins? If you confess to working on holy days, the priest might report you to authorities or demand penance that's worse than the crime. If you don't confess it, you're adding lying to your list of sins. If you confess vaguely, I have sinned in my work, the priest will probe for details. It's a spiritual trap with no good solution. Your master has a strategy that he's shared with you. Confess minor sins in detail to distract from major ones. Admit to impure thoughts, small vanities, minor jealousies. Keep the priest focused on personal failings rather than professional violations. It's confession as misdirection, which probably adds more sins to your ledger, but at least they're private sins without legal consequences. Medieval spirituality. Gaming the system while praying for salvation. The afternoon confession session is crowded. Everyone in the parish has to confess at least once a month. And Sunday is the designated day. You're waiting in line, rehearsing your performance, when you overhear the baker ahead of you confessing to selling bread on a feast day. The priest's response is immediate. That is a serious sin, my son. You have profaned the holy day and prioritized earthly profit over spiritual duty. Your penance is to donate 1 week's bread to the parish poor, and to fast for 3 days as reminder of your transgression. 1 week's bread. That's devastating. The baker is arguing that he has a family to feed, that customers demanded the bread, that he had no choice. The priest is unmoved. The penance stands, and if it's not fulfilled, the sin remains unforgiven, and an unforgiven sin means potential damnation. You're revising your confession strategy immediately. Your turn arrives. and you're kneeling in front of the priest, who's seated in his confession chair looking simultaneously bored and judgmental. You're launching into your prepared script. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I have been prideful in my work, thinking myself skilled when all talent comes from God. I have felt envy toward others more fortunate. I have failed to pray with sufficient devotion. The priest is nodding along. These are standard sins, the kind everyone commits. He's about to assign some routine penance when he asks, "And in your work as a baker's apprentice, have you participated in any deceptions or dishonest practices?" There it is, the targeted question. You're choosing your words carefully. Father, I have learned that the trade involves complexities that sometimes conflict with ideal Christian conduct. I strive to be honest, but I am bound to obey my master, and his decisions are not mine to make. It's a masterpiece of non-admission. You've acknowledged problems without confessing specific acts. You've deflected responsibility to your master while maintaining your own innocence. You've essentially said nothing while sounding penitent. The priest looks skeptical, but he can't pin you down without more specific questioning. And the line behind you is long. He assigns standard penance, 5 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, and a reminder to maintain honesty in all dealings. You've escaped. This time. Here's what the history books don't emphasize enough. The confession system gave clergy enormous power over tradespeople. A priest could pressure confessions about business practices, then use that information for church benefit-demanding donations, requiring penance that benefited the parish, or even sharing information with authorities. Spiritual counsel became economic leverage. You're leaving the church, having completed your penance prayers, and you're thinking about the fundamental contradiction. The church condemns work on holy days but expects the same level of tithes and donations regardless of lost production. The church demands honesty but creates economic conditions that require deception. The church preaches charity while extracting wealth from struggling tradesmen. The system is designed to keep you guilty, penitent, and paying. Back at the bakery, your master is checking the dough you mixed earlier. It's rising nicely, which means tomorrow you'll have bread to bake. Illegal Sunday preparation has successfully circumvented holy day restrictions, and tomorrow you'll confess this sin, receive penance, and repeat the cycle. This is medieval religious life for tradespeople. A constant negotiation between spiritual requirements and economic necessity, where survival requires sin and sin requires penance and penance requires payment. Your master is tallying the religious costs: Sunday donations, feast day dispensations, penance requirements, tithe obligations. It's a parallel tax system run by the church, and it's just as burdensome as civil taxes. Maybe more, because it comes with threats of eternal damnation. 63 holy days this year, he mutters, consulting a church calendar. 63 days we're not supposed to work, plus 52 Sundays. That's 115 days, almost a third of the year when we should be idle. But you can't be idle because bills don't stop. Guild fees continue. Customers need bread, and life requires income. So you work and sin and confess and pay and work again. The sun is setting, your day of rest is almost over, and you're more exhausted than after a regular workday. Between church services, confession, penance prayers, and illegal bakery preparation, you've been active for over 12 hours. Rest day, indeed. Your master is preparing for midnight, when Sunday officially ends and work can resume. There's dough ready, the oven is prepared, and you'll start the week with a full production schedule to make up for lost Sunday revenue. The church bells will ring matins at midnight, signaling the end of the Lord's Day, and you'll be there, shoving wood into the oven, beginning another cycle of labor that the church will condemn as greedy while demanding its share of the profits. You're heading to your sleeping corner, And you're thinking about the other holy days coming this month. Saints' feast days, religious observances, mandatory rest periods. Each one is a day of lost income, illegal work, confession, and penance. The cycle is eternal, or at least it feels that way. Medieval religious regulation of commerce, where piety and profit collide, and the collision is carefully monetized by those in power. You're 37 years old, know what, least you think you are. Record keeping isn't precise and you've lost track somewhere along the way. You made it through apprenticeship, survived a decade as a journeyman, somehow passed the masterpiece examination on your third attempt, and you've been running your own bakery for 8 years now. You should feel accomplished, successful, even. Instead, you're feeling your body systematically shutting down, and you're calculating how many more years you can physically do this work before something breaks permanently. Welcome to the endgame of a medieval baker's life, where retirement is a fantasy and most of your colleagues are already dead. You're standing in front of your own oven, in your own bakery, bought with money borrowed at rates that would make modern loan sharks blush, and you're noticing that your hands shake now. Not constantly, just when you're tired, which is always. The tremor is subtle but enough to make precision work difficult. Shaping loaves takes longer. Your accuracy with the peel is declining. Yesterday you dropped a batch because your grip failed. This is what 40 years of repetitive motion does to hands. The joints are swollen, the tendons inflamed, and there's a constant ache that no amount of rest not that you get rest can relieve. Baker's hands, terminal stage. Your back is worse. You can't stand fully upright anymore. There's a permanent hunch from decades of bending over mixing troughs and leaning into ovens. Sometimes when you try to straighten, something in your spine makes a grinding sound that you can feel more than hear. Your apprentices have started taking over the heavy lifting because you simply can't do it anymore without risking complete collapse. You're becoming what you used to pity. An old master whose body is broken but who can't stop working because stopping means destitution. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this final section. The average life expectancy for medieval bakers who survived childhood was around 45 to 50 years, significantly lower than other trades. And those who lived longer often did so as invalids, their productive years ending in their early 40s when their bodies simply gave out. You're already past the point where many of your colleagues died, and you can feel why. Your lungs are the worst betrayal. Remember that slight wheeze you developed as an apprentice? It's a constant companion now, a rattling soundtrack to everything you do. Breathing deeply is impossible. Your lung capacity has diminished to maybe half of what it was in your youth. Climbing stairs leaves you gasping. Heavy exertion triggers coughing fits that bring up gray, flour-tinged sputum. Baker's lung. Advanced stage. You're drowning in air, suffocating on the very substance that sustained you. You're mixing dough this morning. You still do it yourself because you can't quite trust the apprentices with consistency, and you have to stop every few minutes to catch your breath. What used to take 20 minutes now takes an hour. Your productivity is declining, which means profits are declining, which means you're slipping toward the financial edge that claims most aging bakers. One of your apprentices, a kid who reminds you painfully of your younger self, is watching you struggle. You can see the calculation in his eyes. How much longer until the master can't work at all? How much longer until this bakery is available for someone younger and stronger? He's not being cruel. He's being realistic. This is how the system perpetuates itself. The old and broken are replaced by the young and desperate, and the cycle continues. You're thinking about the other master bakers from your generation, the ones who came up through apprenticeship with you. Thomas, remember him? Died 6 years ago when his lungs finally gave out. He was 41. Master Robert, the guild inspector who used to check your bakery, collapsed in front of his oven at 43. Heart gave out, probably from decades of heat stress and overwork. Master John from the next street over is still alive but can barely function. His hands are so crippled with arthritis that his son does all the actual baking while John just exists, a ghost in his own bakery. You're one of the lucky ones, still working at 37. Lucky. That's what this has come to. Surviving into your late 30s counts as good fortune. The guild records tell a grim story if you know how to read them. Entry after entry. Master baker deceased. Position transferred to eldest son. Master baker incapacitated. Bakery sold to settle debts. Master baker unable to continue. Apprentice contract transferred. The guild tracks this data meticulously, not out of concern but because they need to know who's paying dues and who's becoming a liability. You've seen the transition process up close because you're living it. Your productivity is declining, which means revenue is declining, but costs remain constant. Guild fees don't decrease because you're struggling. The assize inspectors don't give you easier standards because you're old. Your apprentices still need feeding. The oven still needs fuel. And your debt, that loan you took to buy this bakery, still accrues interest regardless of your physical condition. The math is brutal and simple. If you can't produce enough to cover costs, you lose everything. You're checking the ledgers now. Something you do obsessively because the numbers terrify you. Income down 15% from last year. Expenses up 10% due to grain prices and a recent fine for ironically selling underweight bread because you're shaking hands miscalculated portions. The gap between revenue and costs is narrowing, and when it closes completely, you're finished. Most master bakers don't retire. They work until they physically can't. Then they sell the bakery to settle debts, and they spend whatever remains of their life depending on family charity or begging. The guild has no pension system, no retirement fund, no support for members who've given their bodies to the trade. You used to think you'd be different. You'd save money, plan ahead, secure your old age. But the guild fees, the fines, the inspections, the holy day losses, the equipment repairs, the grain price fluctuations, there's never anything left to save. You're not building wealth. You're just postponing collapse. Here's a quirky detail that really captures the system's cruelty. Some bakers tried to establish mutual aid societies groups that would support elderly or disabled members. The guilds generally opposed these because they threatened the established hierarchy. If bakers could retire with dignity, they might make demands during their working years. Better to keep everyone desperate and dependent. Your eldest son is learning the trade now. He's 14, and you've taken him on as an apprentice in your own bakery. You should be teaching him skills, passing on knowledge, preparing him for success. Instead, you're showing him a cautionary tale. Work yourself to death by 40, die in debt, and leave your family nothing. He watches you struggle to breathe, to lift, to function, and you can see him wondering if this is worth it. You don't have an answer. The pain is constant now. Your back, your hands, your chest, there's no position, no activity that doesn't hurt. You've tried every folk remedy, poultices of herbs, prayers to saints, even consulted a physician once until you heard his fee. Nothing helps because the damage is structural, permanent. Your body is a machine that's been run beyond its capacity for decades. And now it's breaking down in real time. You're pulling loaves from the oven, and the heat that you used to tolerate without thought now feels overwhelming. Your temperature regulation is shotyery, always either too hot or too cold, never comfortable. The oven's radiant heat makes you dizzy, and twice this week you've nearly fainted while working. Your apprentices have started positioning themselves to catch you if you fall. It's humiliating and necessary. Historians still argue whether medieval people accepted physical decline as God's will or fought against it with available resources. From where you're standing, barely standing, it seems like both. You accept that this is the natural end of a baker's life while simultaneously doing everything possible to delay the inevitable. You're thinking about Master John, the one who's now just a figurehead in his own bakery. You visited him last month, and the sight was devastating. He sits in a chair near the oven, unable to work, unable to help, just present. His son runs everything while he watches, a living reminder of what happens when your body quits before you die. That's your future if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you die suddenly, heart attack, stroke, or just your lungs finally refusing to process another breath of flour-laden air. Neither option is appealing. The Guild offers no sympathy for aging members. You're expected to maintain your dues, meet your obligations, and compete with younger bakers whose bodies haven't yet betrayed them. There's no reduced-rate membership for the elderly, no accommodations for declining capacity. You're either a full master baker or you're nothing. You're calculating how much longer you can maintain the fiction of full capacity. A year? 2? The decline is accelerating. Things that were difficult last month are impossible this month. The trajectory is clear, and it ends with you unable to work, unable to pay debts, and losing everything you've built. Your wife knows. She sees you struggling, sees the fear in your eyes when you check the ledgers. She started taking in sewing work, trying to build alternative income for when the bakery fails. It's a sensible precaution and an acknowledgement of inevitable disaster. You should be planning succession training your son to take over, negotiating the transfer of the bakery. But he's only 14, years away from being ready, and you don't have years. The timing is all wrong, like everything else in this profession. Some master bakers solve this by taking on a partner, a younger baker who provides the physical labor while the older master contributes expertise and facilities. It's a survival strategy, but it also means admitting you're failing, sharing profits, and potentially being pushed out of your own business. You're too proud for that. Yet, the afternoon brings another coughing fit, this one worse than usual. You're hacking up gray sputum tinged with something darker, blood. Probably. Your lungs are bleeding from the constant irritation, the scarred tissue breaking down. This is how it ends for many bakers. A lung infection they can't fight off because their respiratory system is already destroyed, or internal bleeding that slowly drowns them. You're cleaning your mouth and returning to work because what else can you do? Stop working and starve? Admit defeat and lose everything? You've invested 40 years in this trade. You can't just walk away, even if walking is becoming difficult. Your apprentices are avoiding eye contact. They know what the blood means. They're probably calculating how long until the position opens up, whether they have enough saved for the masterpiece examination, who they'll need to bribe or impress to take over this bakery. It's not personal. It's just the system, grinding on. Evening is approaching, and you're exhausted beyond description. What used to be a manageable workday now feels like climbing a mountain. Every movement is deliberate, calculated to conserve energy. You're rationing your physical capacity like it's a finite resource, which it is. Your son is handling more of the work, trying to compensate for your decline. He's learning faster than he should have to, thrust into responsibility before he's ready because his father's body is failing. It's good training in a horrible way, seeing the full reality of the profession, not the romantic notion of skilled craftsmanship. You're sitting now, something you never allowed yourself during working hours in your younger days. But standing is too taxing, and you can supervise from a chair well enough. The transition from active master to supervisory figure is happening whether you want it or not. The other masters in the guild are watching your decline. Some with sympathy, they know they're next. Others with opportunistic interest. Your bakery's location is good, and when you fail, someone will buy it cheap. The guild itself is probably already discussing who will take over your membership, how to handle the transition, whether your debts will be satisfied from the sale. You're a problem being managed, not a person being supported. Here's what the romantic histories of medieval craftsmanship don't tell you. The system had no place for the elderly, the sick, the broken. You were useful while you could produce, and then you were discarded. All that talk about guild brotherhood and craft solidarity evaporated when you became a liability instead of an asset. You're closing up for the night, moving slowly, conserving energy. Tomorrow you'll do this again, and the day after, until you can't. The timeline is unclear, but the destination is certain. Your son is helping you walk home. When did you start needing help walking? You used to stride through these streets confidently. Now you're shuffling, leaning on a 14-year-old for support, hoping you make it home without collapsing. This is what baking takes from you: your youth, your health, your dignity, and finally your life. You're lying down, every joint aching, and you're thinking about the morning. 2 a.m. will come, and you'll drag yourself to the bakery again because the alternative is failure. How many more times can you do this? How many more 2 a.m. wake-ups do you have in you? The answer is probably fewer than you need. Medieval bakers rarely retired peacefully. They worked until they dropped, died in debt more often than not, and left their families struggling. The profession promised independence and prosperity, but delivered broken bodies and financial ruin. You're one of the lucky ones, they say. You survived to 37. You own your own bakery. You have a son to carry on the trade. Lucky. As sleep finally comes, you're thinking about those first days as an apprentice. The naive kid who thought he'd master the craft and live comfortably. You did master it, and it destroyed you anyway. That's the final lesson of medieval baking. Skill isn't enough. Dedication isn't enough. Success still means your body breaking down by 40, your savings consumed by the system, and your final years spent watching younger bakers take what you built. The oven burns hot. The work never ends. And eventually, inevitably, you burn out too. But for now, you're drifting into sleep, and the bakery seems far away, just for these few precious hours of rest. Tomorrow's bread will wait until tomorrow. The oven, the flour, the endless kneading gall of it fades into the background as your breathing finally slows and steadies. Outside your window, the medieval town is settling into its own rhythm of night, church bells marking the hours in the darkness. And somewhere down the street, another baker is probably stirring, beginning the cycle you know so well. It's strange how the mind works when you're this tired, how the boundaries between past and present blur, how you can almost forget the aching in your joints and just remember the warmth of fresh bread, the satisfaction of a perfect loaf emerging from the oven, golden and crackling. Those moments were real too, mixed in with all the hardship. Small victories in an unforgiving world. The flour dust settles in the rafters, catching moonlight like the finest snow. Your breathing matches its gentle descent, slow, steady, peaceful. The weight of 40 years begins to lift, just a little, as sleep wraps around you like the softest blanket you've never actually owned. There's a comfort in the familiar, even when the familiar is hard. The bakery will be there tomorrow, unchanged, waiting. But tomorrow is far away now, separated by the mercy of sleep and the quiet hours before dawn. Let your own breathing match that rhythm now. Slow and steady, like dough rising in the darkness. Everything softening, everything settling. The medieval world fades into shadow. The oven's heat becomes a distant memory, and you're floating somewhere between then and now, between sleep and dreams, where nothing hurts and everything is finally, blessedly still. Rest now. The bread will keep. Tomorrow is far away, and you're safe in this moment of perfect, peaceful quiet.